The game's emblem appeared when someone noticed that one day, a new game had caught everyone's attention. The protagonist looked at the tower as the story continued about adventure and romance, various locations. Also about hidden dungeons and unknown secrets, monsters and battles, and monsters that become stronger each time. The game had a variety of fresh content. However, no matter how popular this game was, the lifespan inside it was fixed. The game, dominating the entire industry, could not keep up with the passage of time. Therefore, many players' interest in the game faded over time, only experts remained in the game. The protagonist said that he was one of them. Then he added, the worst of all. The guy turned his back. The monster bared his teeth, and the protagonist thought that this is why this very expert begins to boil. He looked up at the monster. The beam pierced the space, and the protagonist thought that he was now returning to the time when the game had just captured everyone's attention. The guy sat on the ground and thought that this was all in order to start all over again as a newbie. The game's emblem appeared when the protagonist noted that he was a pro, a god machine. It was a virtual reality game that came out 15 years ago. He continued to say that he instantly fell in love with it and became obsessed with it. Over time, he completely surrendered to this game. The protagonist stood in front of the gate 15 years later. Suddenly, Lee Eugene clenched his fists when someone called him and asked if he went to get the enhancement stone. He doesn't have any thoughts, right? Then he thought, lousy lone shark, he will follow him even in the game. After which the brunette opened his mouth wide, put out his fists and asked when he was going to make a fortune and return all the money. They only live once, right? As the protagonist headed for the door, someone told him to stand still, not to make hasty decisions, and to calm down. A split in space occurred when the voice added, please, just once. After which a sword appeared when the stranger said to show him hope. The protagonist noted that users who have been playing the same game for a long time without changes are called experts. He was a pro who had been playing this game for 15 years, then he opened his eyes wide and thought that all he needed was to become stronger. The guy narrated that initially, he liked everything and he did not even suspect that he had spent 15 years in the game. He fought with rivals and continued the story that he was the captain of the assault squad, the master of the guild and the lord of the castle. What he earned was enough to live. But now, the protagonist held a stone in his hands, looked at it and talked about a 7-fold increase. If everything works out, then the debts will be over. Then he closed his eyes and thought that he could end his life in debt. After which he threw the crystal into the urn. A notification came about the creation of the item, plus 1 executive sword. Then he frowned and thought that he had a good feeling from the very beginning. If he were a coward, he would not even be able to touch the enhancement stones. Notifications came one after another. Holding the stone in his hands, the guy opened his mouth and shouted, great, go, go. There were already plus 4 executive swords, but the enhancement was finished. After which the protagonist got angry and said that it was too early, a little more was needed. Another sword was created. The brunette smiled broadly and said, good, today he is lucky. Suddenly a voice was heard asking Lee, is he on top today? To which he replied that he managed to enhance the stone 5-fold in one go. Excitement flared up in him. After which he thought that from this moment everything is for real and began to pray to all the gods, asking them to give him strength. He threw the crystal into the urn again and shouted, let's go. The sword lit up. The enhancement continued as the protagonist cheered and shouted, yes. He then opened his mouth wide, holding the stone in his hand, and said that he would succeed today. All that was left was to achieve a 7-fold enhancement. After which he threw the crystal again with a long cry, forward. The sword glowed even brighter. The 7th enhancement occurred as the guy loudly shouted hooray. Opening his eyes wide, he announced that he had managed to achieve a 7-fold enhancement in one go. The protagonist looked away questioningly, after which he smiled with fear in his eyes and thought that now he was not afraid of any borrowers. Considering how much he earned, he no longer needed to worry about debts, no. A tear rolled down his cheek as he said that this was a new beginning. He would start a new path. The guy could not believe it. Looking at the sword, he noted that the weapon he had received thanks to loans, the executive sword, with it he would be able to make a fortune by destroying high-ranking monsters. After which he asked himself if he should pay off his debts, because if he sold the sword, what would he have left? Looking into the void, he thought about what he could do with empty hands. Then he looked down and continued to think that he was already 35 years old, after which he looked up and added that he was nothing but a disaster in the game. Then he looked at the weapon and thought, one more time, maybe it was worth trying again. The protagonist smiled uncertainly and asked what if he could achieve an 8-fold increase. After that, he thought that in any case, his life was miserable. What was the point of starting all over again, having nothing? In his life there were no friends, no family, no loved one. The guy lowered his head and said that if everything worked out, then with the money he earned he would be able to buy an apartment. An inner voice told Lee to calm down. He was in his right mind. After listening to it, the brunette jumped up, threw a stone and shouted, great, let's go. Rays came out of the sword. Then they shone very brightly, after which a notification came about the completion of the 8th enhancement. The guy's eyes were bulging out of their sockets. The protagonist began to cry, spread his arms and thought, thank the gods, they really exist. The virtual voice was delighted and asked if today was really his lucky day, to which the guy, with tears in his eyes, replied that he, too, about what kind of day it was. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the notification and the burning sword. Then he narrowed his eyes. The protagonist exhaled in relief. Then he bared his teeth, grabbed a stone and shouted, "Go," to which the voice asked if he was crazy, and he replied that he told you, a man only lives once. The voice ordered him to stop and asked what he would do if everything went wrong. After which the protagonist thought that the enhancement +9 is an extreme probability. The probability is 12/100ths of a millionth. If everything works out, then he can get money that is not comparable to an 8-fold enhancement. He would be able to afford a luxury apartment in Gangnam, and he would be able to restore his old relationships as well as make new ones. The guy continued to think about absolute luxury, a life without worries, the legendary 9-fold enhancement. The brunette gritted his teeth, frowned and thought that he would create this with his own hands today. He would become the most special. Then he felt the power and realized that no matter what he did today, this was his day. But suddenly, darkness appeared around the guy and an error occurred. The sword disappeared and a notification about the enhancement failure came. The protagonist's eyes diverged in different directions. Sweat ran down his hand when he asked why the 9th enhancement did not occur. The guy was confused and thought that apparently today is not the day when everything is possible. A voice in his head called him and said that it was time for him to go. The protagonist fell into a stupor and asked himself where to go, into a barrel filled with cement or into a chicken feed grinder. He continued the thought that a new life would await him if he could stop at 7-fold amplification. And if he stopped at 8-fold, he could buy an apartment in an elite area, and then asked what happened to him. His thought continued with the fact that if he could stop, he would start living like a human. But suddenly he interrupted his thoughts and thought that everything was wrong. He should not have done amplification from the very beginning. He punished himself by having to use private loans. He should not have started this game at all. After which he cried bitterly and said that if he could go back 15 years, he would never have come to such a life, but it was too late. Everything was pointless. Although he was an expert, he screwed up at everything. Then he caught himself thinking that his head was spinning. He began to fall and asked, "Stress hypertension." The protagonist jumped out of bed in fear. There was confusion in his eyes. He saw an IV and a badge on the bed. Then he looked ahead and asked where is he? A voice was heard saying that he had woken up. The doctor looked at Mr. Eogen and said that he was worried. The red-eyed man asked what, to which the doctor answered him, he does not remember, he was in an experimental capsule of virtual reality. The man looked at the guy and continued to say that he later came to them at the hospital because he had a seizure while going through the beta version. The brunette opened his eyes wide and thought, experimental beta version, what is he talking about? The stranger in the suit and glasses laughed and said that their company would provide him with a new capsule and a small amount of money as an apology. The capsule he used was rejected. But in any case, the incident must remain a secret. The protagonist mentally asked if this was deja vu, then looked at his watch and thought that the realization of reality was slowly coming to him. Then he smiled and asked, so only 15 minutes had passed since his arrival in the capsule. The guy narrated that when he was conscious, he was a being rejected by society, without family and friends. After which he opened his eyes wide and thought, really, he got into the past. Then the main character realized that it turned out that all these 15 years were just a dream. The city stood against the backdrop of the sunset. There was no light in the windows. The guy looked up. He was lying on the floor. There was a mirror next to him. He looked at himself and thought, smooth skin without a single wrinkle. Looking at himself, he thought that this did not at all resemble the face of a 35-year-old man who was addicted to alcohol and cigarettes. After which he frowned, and his face aged when he thought that all this was just a fantasy, and that was just a nightmare. The game emblem appeared again when the guy noted that his whole life was turned upside down because of this damn game. His younger sister said that she would do BJ and borrowed an item from him, but everything did not go according to plan. The girl was threatened with a knife when the guy kept thinking that she went into the hunting area alone and caught the eye of an enemy guild. After which she was attacked by a PK, and dropped the item when the player who kills other players picked it up and disappeared. The guy said that after, in order to somehow recoup the loss of the item, they tried hard to catch a high-level monster and sell its item. Then he remembered how they even took out a personal loan later. The protagonist said that all he knows how to do is play games. He was going to break this wall between the game and reality. He said that more than 15 years have passed since the game was released, so each time it's online was lower and lower. The ratio of 10:1 turned into 100:1. It was becoming increasingly difficult to pay off the interest, not to mention the debts. But in the end, he still bought an executive sword. He thought that he would increase its power and resell it. Then he remembered all the events and added that in the end, The protagonist stood at the mirror. He frowned and thought it really was just a dream. Then he closed his eyes, after which he opened them, clenched his teeth and shouted that this could not be. The evil guy thought that the most promising game had become useless to anyone in 15 years. All that time spent together had become his whole life. Then he looked away and said, "Whatever." The protagonist looked at the capsule and said that he needed to play once, after which the game emblem appeared. The protagonist was falling into the portal. Suddenly a notification came from the machine god that she welcomed him. Dragons were flying in the multicolored sky. A bright beam appeared on it. The guy landed on a rock, looked at the tower and said that all this was not a dream, after which he thought that everything remained the same as it was 15 years ago. However, he walked up the stairs, looked at the columns and said that he didn't know how far he could see into the future. What if it was a completely different game? The protagonist frowned, thought about the inventory. When it appeared in front of his eyes, the guy said, "A sword," but he had no other choice. A sword appeared in the protagonist's hand and he said that he had nothing to choose from. The guy had to fight a level D killer bug. The brunette frowned and said that, as he thought, he would be the first opponent. Suddenly, an opponent appeared in front of him, who tried to attack the protagonist, but he killed him. After which the young man looked up and said that it was easy to destroy these creatures. Then he turned around, saw a large insect and asked in surprise, "What?" The bug tried to strike with its paw, but the guy dodged them. The protagonist jumped up and raised his sword up. Looking at the opponent, he thought that his weak spot was obvious, after which he stuck the sword into the enemy and said, "The back of the neck." The insect's wing moved, so the brunette pulled it out. Then he looked at his hand and said that his body was so light, after which he thought that it was definitely not the body of a 35-year-old man, and asked if he was young. Then the game character was too. The protagonist approached the dead creature and said, "Look what this insect will give him," then frowned and shouted, "Ow." He had a killer beetle sting in his hands, to which he said, "Not bad." The guy stood up and said, "Good." Then he smiled and said that he would do everything from memory, after which he noted that he really went back 15 years. The brunette realized that he was given one last chance. At first he was going to have fun, but in the end everything went in the opposite direction. However, this time everything will be different. The main character smiled, extended his hand and said that he would take all the delights of the game, hidden places and objects, all this for himself, and only after that he would truly enjoy the game. The training tower includes 10 floors, with each rise to a new floor. The difficulty level and the number of monsters increases. Having passed all 10 levels, you can go out to the main world as a player of level 10. The monsters in this game were created strong enough and are given 5 minutes to survive this fight. Usually he is controlled much faster because he already has enough information about this game. You need to attack the monster at vital points to minimize the time spent on its destruction. Lee Eejin saw the sign of the 3rd floor and thought that there were 3 monsters. He saw the sign of the 6th floor and thought that there were 6 monsters. He smiled and thought that there was nothing special even if there were several monsters. Killer bugs were approaching him from both sides. Damaged killer bugs were lying on the floor. The protagonist looked up, trying to catch his breath. He turned around when he heard an announcement that a new record had been set in the training tower on the 9th floor, and asked if he wanted to add his name to the record table. The brunette combed his hair back. He lowered his hand and called himself an expert. He looked straight ahead and heard that the username had been registered, and that it was possible to select a difficulty level on the 10th floor. He turned around and thought in bewilderment that he did not remember this before. He remembered that before they simply called the rank, the next mission, there were not many hidden privileges with hidden items in the training tower. Lee Eejin stared thoughtfully at the notification and said that, apparently, these privileges were available to those who managed to break the world record. A C rank boss is 10 times stronger than a D rank boss, and a C+ boss is 1,000 times stronger than a D rank boss. A person in his right mind would never increase the difficulty level too much. The boss was raised to level C+. The protagonist threw his hands on his hips and thought that he had become almost a pro, and people like him could fight a plus and S rank monsters in the future. He ran up the stairs asking why he should be surprised by things like C+ rank monsters. He smiled as he went up. Darkness appeared and people began to discuss the protagonist. They were surprised that there was a hidden boss in the tower. Only a little time had passed since the game was created, and something like a hidden boss had already appeared. And recently a new world record was set on the 9th floor, and as expected from the Koreans, his nickname is Expert. So little time had passed, and he had already bent everyone over, and someone asked if he was streaming the walkthrough because it would be interesting to watch. The girl opened her mouth and said that she had not seen anyone inside, and if this really happened, then everyone would have noticed it. The man opened his mouth and said that it was impossible to choose a C+ rank boss on the 4th floor. The man looked askance and thought what the hell was going on. He had just passed the 10th floor but was hearing this news for the first time, and how could this even happen? All the players from the newbie village knew each other well. His identity would be revealed one day, and once he appeared, the scouts would take over. The monster was holding an axe in his hands. Then he struck. The guy struck the monster in the eye and said that he knew about the attack pattern and wondered if it would work. Once he got used to the weapon, he would not be able to take damage at all. Lee Eejin struck one after another and said that with his strength, he would be able to defeat the Skeleton King. The brunette swung the sword and then said, "The tasteless power of power," and then asked if this is what people who pass high levels feel. Then he threw me on his shoulder and said that now he can defeat him. The Skeleton King was sitting on the ground defeated. The guy got chest protection and he said that for an expert it was nothing. Protection appeared on his legs. He said that he could get excellent items. He put his hands in front of him and said that it was time to leave the training tower. The protagonist put his hands on his belt and said that in this game items are much more important than statistics, and now that he has C+ rank armor, maybe he should enjoy a tasty morsel. He ran away saying that before leaving this place he needed to check something. The guy started crawling on the floor trying to feel something with his hands. Then he ran over a tile with a picture and shouted that he found it. He clicked on this tile because he heard about this information in an interview with top-ranked players. If you successfully clear the 10th floor of the training tower in the shortest time, you can open another floor. The 11th floor opening notification sounded and a huge gate appeared in front of the guy. The protagonist looked at it and said that he hadn't gone through it himself, but he was curious. It was the highest difficulty level among all the hidden quests. He kicked and said, "Go ahead." Then he smiled slyly, but then something flew into his head. He lay on the ground in bewilderment. A huge fist hit him next to him. He tried to dodge. Lee Eejin started running and said that he had gone back 15 years and therefore all he could do was attack C+ rank monsters, and he didn't understand how this monster could just jump out. There was an explosion. The guy fell from the blast wave. He opened his eyes wide and said something like, "Making fun of me," and how could he possibly defeat him? A huge monster stood in front of him. It was a dragon prison advisor. The protagonist looked at him in amazement and said that the monster in training was S rank, but did not finish and suggested that maybe it was created by mistake and that the world slapped him again. The advisor swung his fist. It flew over the protagonist's head. The monster hit the ground and the guy flew off. The executioner of the dragon prison, belonging to the dragon family, makes this monster one of the few dominant ones on the entire continent. It officially became part of the game only 10 years after its appearance. Then the players gathered in alliances and went on a campaign against dragon-like monsters, and unlike his obese physique, he was very fast and difficult to defeat, so the players were instantly defeated. The fist landed right next to Lee Eejin. He opened his mouth and furiously asked what mechar he should defeat him with. But the monster struck again, and the guy flew off. He curled upside down. But in flight, he turned over and landed on his feet. He looked at the bridges and noticed that something was wrong. The advisor growled loudly. The protagonist looked at him in confusion, and then he smiled and said that this is it. The guy saw the bracelets on his arms and thought that his strength was being restrained by these things, and he had them all over his body. Apparently that was why he couldn't move quickly. On his back there were the same spikes as the bracelets, and the guy thought that, in other words, this creature was not a tormentor, but just a low-ranking monster. The monster stretched out its hand to the guy. It took out a sword and shouted that the developers made the game really fun and there definitely had to be some kind of Easter egg in it. Lee Eejin swung the sword, and then he struck. The advisor looked at him in surprise. The guy was scared at first. Then he smiled. The monster struck, and the brunette thought that even though he had combined poison, a sword, and chainmail, this blow had only lowered his HP by 25 points, and the monster was much stronger than he thought. The monster's fist flew past the guy, and he thought that if he focused on its attacks, he could easily dodge them. In addition, his sword could not break, and at least he did not have to worry about that. Initially, he had the ability to regenerate, but now he was in an area where he could not use this skill. The protagonist lowered his sword and said that from now on, a long battle awaited him. The guy jumped on the monster and thought that this was how his battle to the death with this creature began. The ability to regenerate S-rank monsters is beyond dreams, but since this skill does not work in this zone, everything went differently and he will have to fight with it for several days. Now the regeneration ability does not work on him either, and if he touches him even once, he is dead. So the most important thing for him now is concentration and speed. If he stops concentrating, he will be thrown out of the game, and if his physical abilities fall, the same thing will happen, exit the game. He does not pay attention to anyone and does not expect anything. He rushed at the monster and thought that time was on his side. 3 months later, there were clouds around the tower. The monster was lying on the ground. A drop of sweat was dripping from Lee Eejin's face. His face was drawn, and he said that it was tough. He sat on the ground and was surprised by the notification that came. It said that his level had increased to 32. The maximum level he can have at the moment is 25. Anyone in such a time could not rise above level 26. The guy got up from the ground and said that strength, agility, and magic all grow proportionally to the level, but it is not so important. He held a cutting flurry in his hands and said that all this is because he now has a weapon that decides his gameplay. He squeezed it in his hand and said that the razor is the weapon of the god of calamity himself, a cutting flurry or razor weapon that strikes fear into anyone who dares to challenge you, the weapon of the god of calamity who held the whole world in fear. This sword is at the top of the dark ranking of the god of calamity. In terms of attack power, it did not fit the S rank, it pulls at rank B, because to get it, it was enough to collect 900 points to the attack power. The brunette looked at his hand and said that fear of the razor is not the only thing that guarantees victory. No one would believe that having a C+ rank weapon you can get an S rank weapon. Then he paid attention to the notification that came. It said that the guy was leaving the training tower and he was offered a choice of 2 camps to join, dragons and demons. He folded his arms across his chest and said that he was not going to go to any camp. A notification came asking if he wanted to stay with the human. The protagonist smiled and said, of course. He continued to smile and thought that in this way he would free himself from the control of demons and dragons, and said out loud that although he would not receive various privileges now, and besides, when would he be able to catch monsters from a friendly camp? He made a face and said that because of this, the pleasure of farming would decrease. The sun flew off in the village of newbies. All the people looked at the guy in surprise, and he thought that there was no need to complete the starting quests, and he did not have time to run from point A to point B. People looked at him with disgust, asking what was wrong with this pervert, and the main character thought that from that moment on he fought high-level monsters that no one could defeat, being at the same level as him. The woman covered the child's eyes, and the naked guy thought that if such creatures touch you even a little, then you are a corpse and no armor will help. In such situations, gloves, shoes, and various accessories would not hurt. He turned around when he was called out, calling him a pervert. The man looked at him and said that he saw him auction off a rather valuable item. The other man asked where he got it, because at this level it was impossible. Lee Eajin looked at them in confusion and did not understand what they were talking about. He thought that it was very vague, but still he felt the same smell from them that emanated from him too, a barely perceptible smell of rottenness. The man looked at him sideways and asked where and for what quest he got it. The men crowded around him saying that if he could do it, then they could too, and he should quickly tell them about the quest, and the guy thought it was dead water. The protagonist looked at the men and thought that the place was made specifically for beginners, and when you exceed level 15, you can't come back here. He thought that he had already reached level 32 in the training head, and that's the only reason he was standing here. The man told him that if he didn't tell them, they would follow him and prevent him from rising to the next levels. The man pointed a candy at him and asked that since he had just left the training tower, he was only level 10, and the guy thought that these overgrown guys died on purpose during leveling, revived here and gained experience on beginners. The protagonist stared at him. Then he smiled, and he came closer and said that good things should be shared. He would tell them where to go to reserve a rebel. The men started discussing what to do with him, and at first they thought he was some kind of pervert, since he was standing naked, but it seemed like he was normal, and then they asked him to quickly tell them the place and they would go. The protagonist smiled and said that he would tell them everything step by step, but first they needed to go to a quiet and secluded place. The sun was shining outside. One of the fat men looked at the protagonist and said to tell them he should tell them about the monsters that would be on the way, to which the second chubby man said that he and his brother were cool guys. The guy turned to the people and asked if they didn't think something like, hey, we need to kill this guy and take all his items. The men looked at each other, after which the protagonist, holding a weapon in his hands, said that he knows people like them well. They deliberately wait for newbies like rats. They have gained enough experience and are level 15, and then they attack and take everything from newbies. After his words, the strangers frowned when one of them asked what he just said, and the second added questioningly, he wants them to make him change his mind about entering this game. The guy opened his mouth and said how impudent. Then he clenched his teeth, frowned, put out his hand with a weapon and shouted that he liked their impudence. After which the man swung and shouted that then he should get ready to give up his things and forget about this game forever. The protagonist pierced the fat man with a sword. Snot came out of his nose. The second stranger, looking at this, was shocked. Then the protagonist began to fight off the man in the helmet. The chubby one coughed when his eyes almost fell out. The tall stranger angrily began to take out his weapon and shouted, "What a bastard." Then he opened his mouth wide when the opponent pierced his hand, after which he received a blow. Seeing what was happening, the man in the helmet began to run away. But the brunette caught up with the brat and said how cute it was, after which he screamed in fear. The man hid around the corner, holding his hand and writhing in pain. Then he looked at the protagonist and said, "He's a newbie, who the hell is he?" To which he turned around and replied that newbies are usually taught to treat everyone with love. Suddenly he poked the guy with a spear and added that however, not in this case. Screams were heard between the houses. The protagonist was surprised that they did not have any useful items, then shouted, "Oh," and a slime unit appeared in his hand. The protagonist said that slimes are monsters from which you can't get anything valuable. It seems that these guys raised their level only by killing slimes. He was able to get slime quintessence, so he does not have to farm 1,000 slimes. The young man held out his hand with the slime and said that he thought he wasted his time, but everything went well. This thing will come in handy when he attacks the dungeon. He then looked at the virtual tablet and said that it looks like his item was bought at the auction, then noted that the auction is held for 72 hours from the time of registration. But there are exceptions, in cases where the price increases at least 10 times the original price. The guy smiled and asked, "I wonder what kind of rich kid bought this?" His eyes grew bigger. In the tablet, he saw equipment that cost a lot of money. His mouth wide open, he shouted, "What? Then he looked ahead and thought that this is real business. He was able to sell only the C+ rank armor for that kind of money. The guy continued to say that the iron armor calling for rebellion is a great option. However, is it worth agreeing to this amount? He thinks that many will want to take the initiative into their own hands. Because these are the first days of the game, he is already looking forward to expensive buyers. They need to comb through the money. The brunette smiled and thought that before he was the one who earned money in real life for the sake of playing. Now everything is the opposite. He will be able to earn money in the game and use it in reality. The sky was clear. The head of the protagonist climbed out of the bushes. The guy was standing on a tree branch and looking at the maze of demons. Then he looked at the walkers made of fresh 100% slug extract, smiled, and said that this is a great thing. Between the toes there are pleasant sensations, soft moist skin. This is a very good ability for beginners. After which the brunette looked into the distance and said that it was time to go in search of the item used by the earth-shaking archer. The young man jumped. He then noted that archers were unclaimed before. No matter how strong the archer's attack was, the arrow could not penetrate armor, so no one became one. The protagonist continued to narrate that, however, there was a top archer back then who appeared out of nowhere like a comet. Oddly enough, he always fought and hunted with a special item. In one battle, the archer's opponents laughed at the fact that a bow and arrow were not weapons. However, that day, all of them had broken ankles. That is why that archer was nicknamed the Earth-Shaking Archer. The guy said that later he heard that he received a special item as a reward for passing a hidden dungeon in the labyrinth of evil spirits. Running into the cave, the brunette thought that although he was not an archer, he could move as fast as them. In front of him, he saw a monster. The demon turned its head and looked at the guy, after which the main character smiled and said that his finest hour had come, then asked if they would try to fight. The demon's eyes bulged. The red-eyed man made a dash. Suddenly he was surprised when there were a lot of monsters. The guy opened his eyes wide and shouted that there were many more of them than he thought. But he still went into battle. One of the opponents began to attack. The young man swung the tip. Then he gritted his teeth, looking at the enemies. The brunette thought that, as expected, they were slow. If anything, he could escape from them. However, an item that accelerated movement was a priority. He saw a door in front of him and said that this was it. Then he jumped up and kicked it. Something was falling above him. A metal wall fell near him. Suddenly the floor broke and the main character began to fall. While he was flying, he said that this was great. He could find any way out of this labyrinth. It was not even more difficult than walking around his house. It was dark. The guy saw a monster in front of him. A danger notice came. It said that the dungeon boss was here. The protagonist was scared. The boss was preparing for a crushing attack. His footsteps were causing the floor to crumble. The monster was very big. Looking at its red eyes, the young man said that as he thought, if he was wearing armor, his speed would be reduced by more than 50%. The protagonist stood ready when he said that it would be the same even if he wore iron armor. That's why he doesn't wear it. The scarlet demon bared his teeth. The guy smiled and said that as soon as he came, he prepared a warm welcome for him, then asked if he was bored because no one had come to him yet. The brunette turned around, saw the demons and said that they were persistent guys. He looked at them sarcastically and added that they were not trying hard enough. Time was up. The monsters began to fall, yellow liquid pouring out of their mouths. One by one, they started dying when the guy said that when he looked at it, it was a terrible but powerful force. He then explained about the quick strike. It was a point damage technique that deals a certain amount of hits that cause bleeding, ignoring the shield, a cheating technique that made the Razor #1 in the rankings. The protagonist noted that the damage reduction for a second is 1/100th of the enemy's total HP. This effect lasts until the target is killed. He then looked at the demons and said that one by one, starting with the one who was injured first, it cannot be dispelled. Then he looked at the boss and said that now it remains to deal with him, and then asked, well, now only he is left. The demon took a deep breath. Fire burst out of his mouth as the guy began to run away and hid behind a stone. A notification came that the scarlet demon was caught. The floor crumbled under the monster's feet. The naked protagonist jumped. He jumped off the rocks and landed on his feet. The boy looked at his walking sticks in surprise. Then he raised his head, frowned and asked his opponent how long he thought he could last. The enemy stepped next to the young man as he swung the blade. 3 hours later, the brunette cleared the labyrinth for the first time. He He spread his arms and asked if he could continue. In the beginner area there were 2 more C+ rank monsters besides the Akani, right? Then he looked away and thought. Lee looked into the distance at the nature and said, okay, he chooses it. The sky was brown. Insects were flying in the nightmare forest outside the beginner village. The protagonist quickly ran away from the C+ rank water spider. In motion, he turned to him and asked, since he had caught part of the prey in the net, why was he chasing him? Was even some insect an important prey for him? The rival was above the guy's head. Then the brunette turned around and saw an explosion. He jumped when a trap appeared under him. Then he smiled and said that this is exactly what he wanted. The spider was terrifying. The ground was shaking. Sounds were heard. The protagonist jumped off the cliff. Then he looked down in fear. An insect appeared behind him. It made strange sounds. The guy looked at it from under his brows. They stood opposite each other. The enemy made a dash, after which there was an explosion. Then the brunette laughed and asked. The intruder entered his territory, and he personally came to settle accounts with him. A scaly king cobra appeared, sitting on a rock. The young man said that this was a great chance to deal with 2 bosses at the same time and also increase his agility. Looking at the spider, he continued to say that the water spider, which never lets go of the prey, even if others are already looking at it, then turned his gaze to the cobra and added that the king cobra with scales, which will never let go of intruders in its territory. Continuing to look at them, he said that many players would have their legs buckled from seeing this. This is a funny sight for a person like him. Then the protagonist opened his mouth and said that seeing how they both die, a notification came about receiving the exoskeleton of the soothsayer and the scaly dream without blood and tears. Everyone was surprised that these are C+ rank items. People looked at this in surprise, wondering how he was able to get this and what monsters he killed, and also that this is impossible and this is just a bug. The man clenched his fists and shouted, 3,000, 5,000, are you kidding me, 6,000, 6,500, 7. Lee Eajin leaned back in his chair and said that he had only just started and the stakes were already rising. How much more could he raise? He pressed his lips together and asked if he was really like that. The guy looked to the side and wondered if the poor guys who were shaking over the crumbs that others were throwing down, was that really what they looked like when top players like him were looking at them? Then he looked closely. The phone rang. It was his uncle. The protagonist took the phone in his hand, scratched his head and said that he didn't want to pick it up, but if he didn't answer, the guy would start to annoy him even more. He brought the phone to his ear and said, hello. His head was blown off from the scream that when he was demobilized from the army, he should have stopped by to see him. The guy awkwardly looked away and said that he was just busy here and there. The uncle started yelling at him, asking what he was busy with. The uncle, sitting on the floor, started yelling that after demobilization, he probably did nothing but play with toys. The guy closed his eyes and thought that the uncle was right, and he said that there was a memorial service soon and he should come the day before it. The man continued yelling into the phone that Lee Eajin was already a man and it was time for him to grow up. The guy took the phone away from his ear, and the uncle continued yelling that it was time for him to start earning a living and he should look at his cousins. They all went to prestigious universities. The brunette said that it was as if he himself earned his living, and did not raise him on his parents' inheritance, which he eventually took for himself. He sighed with relief. The protagonist laughed and said that he was a top player and raised the bar. The light on the stream was blinking and he said that he had a long way to go. The protagonist leaned back in his chair. Then he looked seriously and said that there was nothing more to do in the beginner's area and it was time for a real game. He looked at the capsule and his uncle was indignant that he was not listening to him at all. Merciless desert, Zone B, abandoned ruins of an ancient civilization. Lee Eajin looked through binoculars and said that if all his calculations were correct, then it should be somewhere around here. Since the player cannot enter this dungeon alone in the usual way, he will use a trick that only he knows. He looked at the camel and apologized to it, after which he killed it. The camel's bloody body lay on the sand. The protagonist smiled and said that he was there. Explosions began to occur in the sand. The guy looked at all this, saying that he was glad to see him after a long time. A huge sandworm towered over him. The worm opened its mouth. It looked up and said that he had successfully caught it and then ran. And he began to run away from the monster. While running, he turned back and said that he would not be able to catch it if it came back. It had thick skin and no matter how much he hit, he would not be able to cause damage. The worm screamed and crawled after him. The guy grinned, saying that he could not defeat it unless he lured it out of its habitat. He saw the pyramid and said that therefore there was no need to think about anything and just run to the goal. The protagonist was rapidly approaching the pyramid. He ran up the pyramid. There was a roar, and the brunette disappeared from sight. He looked inside the passage. Then he smiled. He stepped inside the tunnel and said that this was great and he was able to overcome the path. He went in there and was surprised. These were abandoned ruins of an ancient civilization, the 7th floor underground. The protagonist looked into the tunnel and decided that this was the place where the sandworm came from. He ran there and said that thanks to the sandworm he was able to get there easily. If he could meet the boss there, it would be great. He looked at the door. He was surprised and thought that the door to the boss room was open and there was already someone there. A conversation was heard from there. The brunette's eyes widened in surprise. The girl looked at the protagonist and said that there really was a person who could get to this place. The guy also looked at him and asked if all his comrades were buried. They both stared at him silently. Lee Eajin looked at them in surprise, and then he frowned and thought that it was Yu Da-hyu. Nuna looked at him and said that it was a coincidence and asked if he wanted to join the raid. They had been waiting here for several days for the last remaining boss. The protagonist wondered what this woman was doing here. He remembered how she asked to take her to the boss, how she was going to stream the walkthrough and asked to borrow a knife, and how she apologized for faking like a fool, and how she offered to borrow money. The guy moved closer and asked if he was interested. Lee Eajin rolled his eyes and thought that he had gone back 15 years and these people still didn't know him. Yu Da-hyu winked and said that he and his sister had died here twice already trying to kill the boss. It was problematic for two people. The protagonist frowned and thought that he needed a human shield for convenience. Then he smiled and agreed to go through the raid together. He grinned slyly and said that he would help them. After the red-haired man's words, the protagonist realized that they were brother and sister, after which the girl looked at him and asked if they would go on a raid together. The main character's head was spinning with thoughts that it was very hard in his past life because of them. He needed to throw away all these feelings and focus on something more important, namely, how to remove them both at once. After which he smiled sarcastically and said, "Okay, they will go together." People looked ahead. In front of them in the darkness stood a throne and a voice was heard that it smelled disrespectful guests. A monster sat on a chair and said that it smelled prey. Then he clenched his teeth and took hold of a spear. The blue-eyed man closed his eye, opened his mouth and shouted that he was coming. The end of the queue sparked. The earth shook. The girl opened her mouth wide and shouted that they were all good at close attack, so they would come close to him. Let's go. The brother and sister turned around. There was no one behind them. The boy frowned and asked where the bastard ran off to which his sister looked around and replied that he was just here. The thought occurred to her that if there had been at least one more of them, they would have caught him. The girl got angry, frowned, and thought that she should use this idiot as a shield. The red-haired ones looked forward in surprise, screaming. Looking at the door handle, one of them asked what it was. Nuna opened her mouth wide, stretched out her hand and shouted that the handle was broken. This bastard, he was up to something. Then she clenched her teeth. The brother looked at her when she clenched her fists and said that nothing could be done. There was only one thing left. The boy narrowed his eyes and replied that he understood her. If they caught this monster, they would officially become pioneers. The unnamed B-rank queen rose up with a spear in her hands. The brother stepped forward and shouted that he was attacking. The monster swung as the boy raised his shield in front of him. The opponent struck. His weapon glowed. Then he used magic. Yu Chang defended himself with all his might. Suddenly, the monster's weapon and the boy's shield collided. The young man, gritting his teeth, shouted to his sister, "Forward." The blue-eyed girl dashed forward with knives in her hands. Then she jumped up and swung at the enemy. A scream was heard, first with the spear, after which the brother opened his mouth wide and screamed. He made a strike with his weapon. The red-haired girl turned around, opened her mouth and said that he had low HP, so a few hits would be enough. In response, the guy said that he understood. They would go like this and headed towards the opponent with a shield. Someone's voice was heard that the connection was really a worthwhile thing. The protagonist, peeping at what was happening through the crack, asked, "Are they now level 30 tanks, right?" Then said that if you skillfully use the tank's ability, then there will not be a single monster that could not be defeated. After which he frowned and continued, "But there is something to be afraid of in the nameless queen." The monster's eyes glowed green. He dealt many blows to the guy. Gritting his teeth, the young man shouted that her attacks had changed, and the speed had increased sharply. They would not be able to avoid all the attacks. The queen dealt a blow, after which there was an explosion. The fragments flew apart when the guy, closing his eyes, screamed. His sister tried to attack her rival. Then she opened her eyes wide and said, "Damn, they have already gotten used to her previous attack style. Now it will not be easy to dodge her blows and her speed." Suddenly the enemy appeared in front of the girl when she closed her eyes and said that it was too late. There was an explosion when the lady opened her eyes. The monster was lying on the ground, blood was flying around him. The protagonist was striking and saying, "Checkmate." The blue-eyed girl opened her eyes wide, stared at the protagonist and asked him. Then her gaze became angry and she continued, "He appeared at the very last moment." Her brother, gritting his teeth, shouted in rage that this coward was sitting in ambush the whole time. They could not get out of here because he broke the door handle. Throwing his sword over his shoulder, the guy replied that thanks to him they defeated the boss, and after all, it was he who saved their lives. Suddenly, a notification came that the nameless queen was successfully defeated, and there was another female player in their group. They were able to discover a hidden quest of forgotten ancient ruins. The heroes asked in surprise, "Female player, hidden quest, what kind of nonsense?" The red-haired ones turned around when the guy said that this bastard ran away again. The guy frowned and asked, "Doesn't she think it's weird? Why didn't their level go up? And why didn't anything drop? They weren't done yet." A voice was heard calling the girl. She grabbed her head when the voice said, "Her body." The monster, lying on the ground, whispered that she must give it to him. The heroine, holding her head, screamed loudly. Suddenly, her face turned black. Smoke swirled around her. Then her eyes turned yellow and she laughed. Standing with the monster's spear in her hands, she shouted, "Scum! They must kneel before her." Her brother was shocked. The protagonist turned his head and said that in order to enter this dungeon, more than 2 people were needed, and at least one of them had to be a girl. That was the reason. A question appeared inside Yu. What was going on? She was controlling her body. The brother looked at his sister questioningly. He received a notification that his partner's soul had been taken over by a monster, the new name of the queen Yu. The girl was told to forget her previous connections. Now she was the mistress of this dungeon. The blue-eyed girl's eyes widened and she thought that she couldn't believe her eyes. Why did they make such conditions for entering here? The red-haired man looked at her, cowering, and thought, "All monsters are so crazy." The protagonist turned his head and said that in order to enter this dungeon, more than 2 people were needed, and at least one of them had to be a girl. That was the reason. Then he looked away and thought that in order to attack alone, he thought of cheating with these 2, but everything did not go according to plan. The guy looked ahead in surprise when an explosion occurred. The yellow-eyed girl stood in front of him, saying that she was the queen of Rhodesia, an ancient state that was destroyed during the war between dragons and demons. Then she opened her mouth wide and shouted that today she will revive Rhodesia. They are wild beasts. The real heroine was apologizing to her brother in her thoughts, and thought that her punishment is much more serious than his. Well, at least she will be able to find out what the reward is for this raid. Looking at the notification, she was surprised. It's strange why it hasn't appeared yet. The protagonist began to undress. Then the blue-eyed girl looked at him and shouted, "That's right, that pervert, the raid is not over yet." The naked protagonist raised his weapon and asked, "Well then, they will begin." The 2 personalities of the girl screamed that he was a dirty creature and a fucking psychopath. Then the heroine used force with a spear. The guy swung back. Then he smiled and said that she missed. The queen got angry and bared her teeth. Sparks flew. The brunette rushed from side to side. The girl struck again. The protagonist dodged him too. The yellow-eyed girl looked at him in surprise and asked what. Then she became furious, raised her hands and screamed that he was a fucking rat. She launched force around herself. Then the heroine looked down and asked what he was doing. The protagonist was lying on the floor, writhing in pain and saying that he hit his head. He would lie down for a while. Suddenly, he crawled away like a centipede. The red-haired girl fell into a stupor and her eyes became square. Then she silently raised her hand. The red-eyed man looked at her emotionlessly. Illustrations of power were displayed on the ceiling, with the girl standing with a staff in her hands and the guy sitting on the floor. After which the lady looked at her opponent and told him to die. The brunette smiled and said that the atmosphere was heating up. Sparks flew from the ceiling. The protagonist's legs ran when he said that then he shouldn't stand like a pillar either. He showed different techniques when the girl looked at it in surprise. After which the main character landed on his feet and spread his arms out to the sides. The heroine's pupils narrowed when she thought about what this idiot was doing. Suddenly the guy approached her when her thought continued with the fact that he seemed to have been on such raids more than a dozen times. Then power flew at her. She told her to stop. The brunette delivered multiple blows when the girl rioted and screamed, "Stop, enough." The protagonist smiled wickedly and thought that since the previous battle her HP was almost at 0, then they would end it, the end. Then he raised the tip up when the lady extended her hand, defending herself. Suddenly she quietly said that she had freed herself. Tears appeared in her blue eyes when she asked him not to kill her. Swinging, the guy replied that he didn't care that she had freed herself, he was going to kill her anyway. Her eyes shrank when she thought that. Suddenly blood splashed and a notification came that the raid on the queen was completed. He had cleared the forgotten ancient ruins. He was awarded a reward. A shiny ancient bronze sword appeared in the protagonist's hands when he said, "Cool." Then he looked away and said that he had collected everything now. Then the guy turned his head, looked at the floor and said that it was the idiots who left so much behind. He started picking up the stones, saying it was a shame, but he would do it anyway when a voice called him a fucking moron. The brunette looked back. Dead Yu, who could leave a will to her teammates within 10 seconds of her death, shouted at him not to pick it up. The protagonist was already holding the coin in his hands when she started calling him a bastard, a monster, a moron, a thick-headed, a goat. Then he continued to pick up the rest, to which the heroine shouted he was serious. She opened her mouth wide with tears in her eyes and screamed, asking what the hell he was doing. A notification came asking if he wanted to leave his name. The protagonist looked away and said, "Stagnant water." On the tablet screen was a moment from the battle when the queen missed. The brunette sat in the capsule with a tablet in his hands and remembered that he then hid in a clay pot and recorded it all. The recording continued all this time. Looking at the screen, he continued to say that the girl had such a face, he could not help but film it, did not think that he filmed the entire raid. Then he looked up and said that this is a video from his first raid. After which the guy sat down at the computer and said that it was somehow boring, maybe he could edit it and post it to the group. The protagonist was fast asleep when his phone was blowing up with notifications. The building stood in the evening city, one of its windows was open. The trash can flew off when an enraged Yu Chang walked around the office and shouted that the more he thought about this pervert, the more he pissed him off, to which his sister answered him that his rage would not change anything. Gritting his teeth and frowning, the brother looked at his sister and asked if she was laughing. He made them look like idiots. The girl silently filed her nails. The brother looked at the redhead when she told him to stutter, then turned to him and angrily asked who he thought was the face all over the internet. The guy stood there and listened as she continued to say that this pervert had uploaded a video in which he had censored only his own face. The brother only nodded. The blue-eyed girl bared her teeth and said that she would find this bastard. Then she hesitated and thought that her plans to become a beautiful brave mystic were ruined at the very beginning. Then she continued the thought that her first boss was a pretty babe, she would take revenge on him for this shame. Crying, she thought that although it brought her considerable popularity, when a guy came into the office and told his brother that he had cleaned everything up, after which he turned to his sister and asked if she was okay. The brunette looked at his brother and asked if he remembered that guy, Hong they call him. It turns out he works at a construction site. To which he replied that he told him that he had no money and no job, and the man added that he said that he had recently gotten a job, I think. The red-haired man smiled sarcastically and asked to bring him here. Then he looked away and added that he would make him pay with his body, just like those guys. There were many capsules with people in the room. They lay motionless when he thought that the top 20 was just around the corner. The brother and sister were serious when one of them continued the thought that it was possible to earn more in the game than now, but they had a way to go before reaching the top 20 and recoup the rent of this room. Plus they had to find that pervert. He would destroy him. A voice came from the research room of the Seoul K1 Pro Players team. Look at this. The guy was sitting at the computer and asking, a B+ raid video. When the second asked again, early B+, he didn't know who it was, but he was a monster. The brunette opened his mouth in surprise and said that it was a little strange. Looking at the footage from the video, he asked who this crazy pervert was. The young man looked at the screen and asked if he wanted to say that he won like this in the B+ rating, to which the first closed his eyes and replied that it was as if he saw the dance of death. One of the guys grabbed his head and shouted how they should play now if he exists, to which he received the answer that he should invite him to his father's noodle shop. The blue-eyed guy silently looked away. Director Ying stuck out his finger, opened his mouth wide and shouted, "Send a message to this guy from Deadwater right now, he wants this guy to join their team." The man, looking at the main one, asked what salary to offer him, to which he replied that it was not negotiable, give him whatever he demands, to which the first one asked, one message would be enough. The director got furious and shouted that he was stupid. He was sure that at the moment he had been sent 1,000 messages if they sent him just a message. They were already out of luck if the Chinese took him away because of their slowness. The brunette was making a call at that time. Then the employee said that he received a response from Deadwater. It said that the hero agreed. The blonde silently looked at the phone. The brunette stood with his arms folded across his chest, wondering what those monstrous movements were, when a voice came from behind him. "Oh, director, we need to call a medic." Scrolling through the moments from the video in his head, the blue-eyed man thought, unbelievable, it looks like he's raided the boss 100 times, he's sure. Then he looked ahead and continued thinking that this guy was a step. No, he was several steps ahead of him. His hands tensed. It was on a floating island of unknown rank. An incomprehensible creature appeared. The protagonist was fighting a C-rank sewage snake. He cut it in half. Suddenly a notification came that he had found a secret dungeon, a rotting underground canal. When the guy plugged his nose and said, "What a terrible smell," the name of the pioneer was added to the Akasha records. The protagonist narrated, recalling his reaction, that to be honest, he was shocked. He got more views than he planned. But if you think about it, you could have ended up on the main page of the site, but he, fortunately, ended up in the top best gamers. Then he opened his mouth and asked, with this, after which he scratched his temple and said, amazing. Remembering the fight, he said that if you look at it from another point of view, only because of 15 years of training, it looks easier than drinking water. He thought too highly of high-level players, the one who breaks mountains with one blow and makes cuts with surgical precision. He continued to say that he only thought about high ranks for so long that he unconsciously underestimated himself, but this could not last forever. The protagonist stood on his walkers and said that pro player, this is not so bad. Then he frowned and said that it was not in vain that he spent so much time, no one will defeat him again, right? Director Young was crying on the couch some time later. A voice was heard greeting a wanderer in a decayed underground canal. In front of the protagonist stood a hidden NPC crying statue of Pygmalion. The voice asked the guy to fulfill one of its requests. Then the statue began to cry as the voice continued to say that if he fulfilled its request, it could take all the gold that was hidden behind it. The guy pressed the button to refuse. Then he heard a request not to do this. It asked to destroy it. The voice pitifully asked to end his suffering. The brunette looked away in surprise and thought, destroying the statue is a simple quest, but if he accepts it, Pygmalion will simply disappear and the reward will be small. This will not work. Then the crying statue lowered its head and said that if he does not want to destroy it, then let him take revenge on the one who brought him such suffering. He then asked to find this damn statue and take revenge on her. This is the crying Galatea. A notification came in saying that he could take the quest Pygmalion's request. Lee Yijin, rowing the oars, said that it was a jackpot and that he actually got this quest just like that. A player named the God of Battle mentioned in an interview a long time ago. The thing that made a player who had been ranked 10 for a long time rise to rank 1 was the reward for this quest. The statue said that it used to be a human and a famous sculptor. The guy said that he was not interested in this and he was skipping it. He jumped to his feet and shouted that the real game was about to begin. He would defeat this guy with whom he had so many problems. Forward to the jungle of chaos. But then something appeared from above. Nuna hit the boat with her axe. The guy, stepping on the ground, asked if she was really attacking him. The girl turned around and said that she had finally found this bastard and was going to take revenge on him for everything he had done to her. The protagonist turned around at the sound of shouts that they were all here too. A crowd of men were standing and shouting that he was a corpse and they were all out for revenge and that he shouldn't get into trouble. The protagonist looked around and thought that he couldn't remember them all, but he was causing damage wherever he went. Then he asked how they knew he would be here. Nuna approached him and asked if he thought she had been sitting idle all this time. Did he think he could stand up to such a crowd? Lee Yijin looked around and thought that he had completely memorized her attack patterns when she was a boss, but killing players might be a bit difficult. The people around him started preparing to attack, and the guy thought that he was sure of one thing: they weren't just here for revenge. He licked his hands and thought that maybe he could use them. There was a pop. Only clothes were left on the ground and everyone wondered where he went. The girl looked back when she heard the question about where they were aiming. Lee Yijin stood naked on the pole and looked at everyone arrogantly. Then he smirked and spread his arms and asked if they would accompany him on a secret raid. The man asked in surprise what the hell he was talking about, and the other said that he was trying to trick them again. He raised one hand and said that he knew what they really wanted, and that was information. He threw his head back and said, bosses, hidden dungeons, information about quests, and the first run, because that was why they were chasing him. Everyone looked at him in confusion. Then the protagonist scratched the back of his head and said that he thought his outfit was also quite unique. He spread his arms and said that in any case, as they expected, he could provide them with all this special class information. The girl pressed her lips and thought, the first run. Lee Yijin extended his hand and asked what they were going to do now if they wanted to go with them. And thus, their team was formed. Yu Da-hyu, Nuna, the Lone Shark Twins, Li Dongbai, Li Yunbai, Li Jianbai, the three beautiful musketeers, the mobs, the rest he sent in case of trouble, and the professional player of the Soul branch of K1, Ma T-Gang. The protagonist looked at T-Gang and abruptly turned away, thinking that this was amazing. It really was T-Gang. The number 1 god of battle in the national rankings, the ace of the national team, the best in the hero category, he was standing right in front of his eyes. The protagonist smiled. Then he looked into the void and thought that he didn't seem to have done anything to him that could anger him. Someone cut up an insect. The girl grimaced and said that it was disgusting and there were too many parasites here. They were in the jungle of chaos. Nuna said that only lowly D-rank monsters appeared here, and asked if there really was a hidden dungeon in such a place. The protagonist turned to her and said that they were almost there. The man opened his mouth and said that it was so hot and humid here, his panties were already wet, and where was there water or at least fruit? Nuna turned to the protagonist and asked who he really was and how he knew that there was a hidden dungeon here. The guy looked up and said that he just found it while walking. The girl, walking past the bushes, told him not to lie, because the dungeons in the beam are created by monsters or NPCs, so even the game masters do not know the exact location. They walked deeper into the bushes, and the girl asked if he was sure about the correct direction. They plunged into the darkness. They came out to the circus tent. It was a secret dungeon, a secret meeting of dolls. Lee Yijin ran forward saying that he would go first. Da-hyu looked at it and concluded that he wanted to appropriate everything for himself. He ordered him to stop. They entered the hidden dungeon of the secret meeting of the dolls. The controllers behind the scenes were on alert. The entities on the stage awakened. The jesters began their performance. The blow fell between two guys. They were the serial killer Pirate and the gargoyle. The protagonist rose into the air with the help of red leather steps and said that for guys like them who live for performances, There is nothing more terrible than the disappearance of the stage. Then he stamped his foot, and the ground began to crack. The monsters began to shake, and the protagonist said that for clowns and clown-like monsters, the damage from the earthquake is double. They also have the attribute of a minion, so the blood is doubled. The gargoyle tried to strike, but the guy dodged, and Pirate put out his hands. Lee Eugene continued to dodge the blows and said that in other words, they receive 4 times the damage from one blow. The protagonist plunged the blade into the clown's head. He smiled and asked what he should do because he wanted to be hit, but his body reacted on its own, so he missed again. The protagonist looked at the battlefield and thought that he had killed a whole bunch of C+ rank monsters in an instant. Jianbai looked at the protagonist and thought that, frankly speaking, he had no flaws. When she came to the dungeon and saw the bronze giant, it had already been defeated. The protagonist stood on the monster, and the girl thought that even she as a player was repulsed by its abilities. She personally wanted to see it in action, so she joined the raid, but she did not expect this. She turned around when someone asked for some items. The men angrily shouted that it didn't look like a group raid. He just killed all the monsters by himself. They wanted the rewards too. Everything should be equal in a team. Ieogen turned around when he heard this. The girl looked at them and thought that this sucked. Da-hyu grimaced and wondered why they were whining. Tegang rolled over and thought that after all, he had no reason to be on his side and why they were probably even right. Tiek pointed his finger at the main character and said that he hoped that he didn't want to grab all these things for himself. The guy replied that he would give them to him. The man's eyes widened when he heard this. Ieogen smiled and said that they could split everything equally between them. He was a team after all. The man grimaced. Then he rubbed his nose and said that he was better than they thought, and the guy replied that since they were a team, they should be honest with each other. Da-hyu looked at them and thought they were idiots. She bit Booga and thought that it was impossible and he couldn't be that kind. He definitely had skeletons in his closet and he was definitely trying to use them. The man came up behind the main character and told him to open the door to the next floor. The girl thought that he was now acting like a simpleton. The door opened. There were many columns in the room. In the center there was a statue of a girl who covered her face with her hands. They found themselves in a secret meeting of dolls too. Everyone began to walk around the statue, saying that they didn't think it would be so spacious, and from a distance the statue looked like a piece of cloth. Everyone scattered around the hall and began to study it, saying that it looked like a room with a boss. They wondered what kind of chairs these were. The hall began to fill with smoke. The controllers behind the curtains began to express their anger. The man looked back and asked where the boss was. A headless man appeared behind him. He fell to the floor. Everyone looked at it in surprise and did not understand what happened. And now the second person died and fell. No one understood what happened. The girl opened her mouth and said with surprise that it was her doing. She aged to a statue and said that this was not an ordinary statue. Blood was wrapped around her hands, and someone shouted that it was a monster and they did not understand how it moved and was already standing in another place. Everyone stared at the statue. The protagonist smiled and thought that, as he expected, Tegan quickly understood everything. This boss cannot be defeated for 5 years, since he was found. It was a statue of a crying Galantia. It was invented based on the Weeping Angels from the Doctor Who series. The girl swung her sword and said that the statue was a monster. They were parodied many times, especially in Dem, and after it was upgraded, it began to look damn scary. The girl struck, after which she looked in surprise. Dongbai was about to hit with her staff and asked to move away. Then she hit it and the statue burst into flames. The girl pressed her lips together in disappointment and said that it was unsolvable. Yunbai frowned and asked how they could defeat it. Tegang frowned and wondered when the boss would attack. Da-hyu turned around and said that it seemed like their attacks wouldn't work until the boss moved and asked if anyone had seen her move. Everyone stood tense and the girl said that she didn't know when she would move, but they definitely wouldn't be able to block the attack and they needed to calculate the time to attack. The man raised one eyebrow and asked how they could make her move. Everyone stared ahead silently. Then they turned their heads towards the sound. Ieogen was standing there wearing a cloak and smiling. Chang opened his mouth and shouted what he was going to do, and anyway, he was the one who dragged them here. The door was locked, they couldn't get out. Then they asked if he had a plan. The protagonist cleared his throat. He raised his finger and said that there were only 2 ways to leave this dungeon. The first was death. The guy raised his second finger and said that the second was to defeat the crying Galathea. The girl opened her mouth and shouted that if they could, they would have won already. How are they going to defeat her if they couldn't see her attacks? The protagonist chuckled and asked when he said that they would defeat her. The girl asked again in surprise, to which the protagonist showed his middle finger. He continued to stand there and he said that he would destroy her himself. Da-hyu looked furious. The man clenched his hand into a fist and asked why he brought them here at all. Da-hyu was surprised when she heard that they were useful. The protagonist smiled sweetly. Then Lute closed his mouth and said that they should give him all the money. Everyone looked at him in surprise and Da-hyu asked what the hell he was talking about. The protagonist folded his arms and said if they hadn't sat on the belt, so she should pay, he would defeat the crying Galatea, so they should provide the payment for survival. Chang clenched his fist and said that it was his fault that they were stuck here, to which the guy in response asked who made them come here. They only came here because of their impudence, they should hurry up and pay. He was sure that they did not want to play a staring contest with a monster that was too tough for them. The girl looked at him silently, then she cleared her throat and asked how much he wanted. The protagonist smiled evilly and said, 100 million gold. Da Hu looked at him furiously. Chang rushed to the guy and said that he was completely out of his mind, he thought that he could do whatever he wanted. The brunette cowered in fear and said that he was very scared. But then Chang's head was torn off. Da Hu closed her eyes and thought that this idiot should have calculated the situation, and the guy told her that now she had to pay double. Then she opened her eyes and wondered why she had to pay for her brother, to which she replied that they were one family. A dagger appeared near the protagonist's face. The girl looked at him intently and said that he shouldn't play with her, she could just share the punishment with the others and finish him off here. How could she even believe that he would keep his promise? Then he grinned and said that if she didn't believe him, she could make a deposit. The DEM deposit system allows you to deposit the promised amount into a third-party account until the transaction is completed satisfactorily. In other words, it is a security deposit. If the payer is not satisfied with the recipient of the payment, the money is returned to him. The third-party account to which the deposit is received does not belong to anyone, it is protected by an absolute rule. The girl remained silent. BSU stared at them in surprise. The boy glanced at everything and continued to say that she could take the reward for defeating crying Galatea. He moved his hand to the side and said that he did not claim it. Everyone stared at him and thought that crying Galatea seemed to be a B+ rank boss. Also due to the advantage of being the first in the world to defeat her, the reward should not be less than B+ rank. Tegang stared at him. Everyone stood silently. Out of all the items in the market, the current highest rank is C+. This is crazy. If they can get it, they will be one step ahead of everyone else. The girl gritted her teeth and put it that she can't fall for this. Why would he refuse a B+ rank item? It means he has something better. Iyajin stared silently. When a player is in a team, he has the right to distribute the reward from defeating the boss. Also, if you upload a raid video, you can expect to get views or even ad revenue. If you leave the raid halfway, the video is automatically deleted. You cannot refuse it. The girl began to slowly put away the dagger. Then the protagonist raised his finger and said that this is the right choice. They have 6 people and the fee is 100 million, so each one needs 14 million. He was very surprised when he saw that the girl contributed 200 million gold. Golden Rain contributed 100 million, Silver Rain contributed 100 million gold. Bronze Rain contributed 100 million, Teak contributed 100 million gold. The God of Battle contributed 100 million gold. Iyajin looking at this, he stared at them and thought that he wanted them to pay a total of 100 million. He seems to be these guys really want to finish this. The girl asked him to keep his word. She looked closely and corrected to make sure that he really will defeat the statue and all the loot from the boss will go to them. To which the protagonist nodded affirmatively, and he began to walk forward, thinking that they must really want to be pioneers. That was the reason for their success in the future. He frowned and thought that in their place he would give up and die, and out loud he said that when he gave the signal, everyone should turn away from the statue. He came close to it. 5 years after the discovery of the Weeping Gallatin, collective reflections, inductive records, counting every unexpected change, hidden options. He put the shield in front of him and thought that only after collecting all this, some guys, having resigned themselves to the possibility of destruction, decided to defeat the terrible and deadly monster. The brunette put the bronze shield of the ancient civilization in front of him. He grinned and ordered to close their eyes. Everyone closed their eyes. The guy looked at the statue and the reflection in the shield. The statue removed her hands from her face. Then she swung, but the guy saw it. He dodged all the blows of the statue, and then he plunged a dagger into her eye. Then he ran away from her. The statue kept trying to hit, but the protagonist dodged them all. He defended himself with a shield. The girl bared her teeth. She looked at her hands. Crying Galatea becomes indestructible when someone is looking at her, but when they stop looking at her, she turns into a monster and attacks the nearest player. The most frightening and important fact about this statue is that it is an attention seeker. The brunette opened his mouth and shouted for everyone to open their eyes. Da Hu opened her eyes and looked around. The statue behind the protagonist returned to its original position. The guy attempted to attack the statue and thought that he had already checked everything. His information was reliable. Its attack pattern resets after each stop. Everyone stared at him when he asked them to close their eyes again, and the protagonist prepared for a new fight, and he rushed into battle. Everyone stood with their eyes closed. Tegan closed his eyes and thought that they were in the middle of a raid and their plan was to close their eyes, and in such a strange situation, all the team members could not leave one thought. Da Hu closed her eyes and thought about what was going on there. She wanted to see what was going on there. Iyajin quickly ran away. He looked back. The statue tried to strike, but he buried his shield, after which it broke into pieces. The brunette looked at him and said that, as expected, this was too much for his shield, but he would squeeze everything out of it. The guy began to wave his spear in the air. He swung and said that in his best years, he could even defeat an A+ rank monster alone. He shouted that it was too early for him to die and rushed to attack. The guy, standing with his eyes closed, thought that he really wanted to look, but if he looked, the crying Galadia would turn into a statue again, and who knows how the dead water would react to that. The man stood with his eyes closed. Everyone stood with their eyes closed, and the girl thought if she should stand in his way. Da-Hyu lowered her head down and thought what would happen if she looked at the boss and immediately closed her eyes. It would hinder his movements and she would kill him with one hit. She gritted her teeth and continued to think that because he was naked, his defense was most likely complete shit. Maybe she should open her eyes. And then she abruptly opened her eyes when she heard that he was the first player to finish the raid with the crying Galadia. The guy stepped aside. The statue was kneeling, covering her head with her hands. The crack went down her head. The protagonist grabbed the blade in his hands. Then he raised it high above his head. He looked up, thanked him and said, 700 million, his bank account will be filled again. Everyone around him rejoiced, and Da-Hyu rolled her eyes and said that she felt terrible, but she couldn't do anything and it was still better than being killed halfway. She turned around and asked what was going on. She opened her mouth and screamed loudly that the boss had already been defeated and they still didn't have any reward. They had received a notification that they were the first. Why wasn't there any reward? Everyone started looking at each other. The girl turned towards the protagonist, and then it dawned on her, she remembered everything that had happened. The statue began to fall apart in two, and the crying Galadia cried out, and the body sealed in the statue awakened. There was an explosion, and the real boss of the upside-down world opened his eyes. Everyone looked at all this in surprise. A huge woman stood up from the statue. Tiak looked at her and thought that she couldn't do anything while they were looking at her. If they could immobilize her, they could come up with a plan. The monster opened its eyes. It was a Medusa of A+ rank. This monster, whose legend was passed down from mouth to mouth, and the dream existence was hidden by the Devil's Tower, just acknowledging its existence crosses out the ideals of magic passed down from generation to reign for thousands of years. Da-Hyu began to turn to stone. She looked at her body and did not understand what was happening. Jianbai opened her mouth and shouted that her body was turning to stone. Yunbai looked at her hands that had already turned to stone and asked, didn't he tell her to look at her? She was indignant. Why did the scheme turn around so suddenly? Da-Hyu turned around and looked at the protagonist with confusion. He stood there and smiled, after which he closed his eyes. The girl's eyes widened and she started screaming that the bastard knew what was going to happen and asked why he didn't tell them. The girl sighed and said that she was shocked and she shouldn't have interfered in other people's affairs out of curiosity. She frowned and said that she remembered his face. The protagonist looked at them in surprise and didn't understand what they were talking about, and then asked if they wanted to kill him. Absolutely all of the bodies completely turned to stone, and the guy said that in this day and age, information and experience are as important as money. The information and experience gained during these days are well worth the money, so for them it was a good deal. They even learned the location of a hidden dungeon. The guy narrowed his eyes and said that knowing the location wouldn't help them get through it. A jellyfish appeared behind him, and the guy wondered if he should play with it. Ijin smirked and thought that after awakening, Medusa does not move for about 30 seconds. Since her specialty is burning mana, you cannot look her in the eyes. He clenched the blade in his hands and thought that even knowing all the patterns of her attacks, now he has a great chance while he has a bronze shield. He clenched the shield in his hand. After that, he looked forward. At that moment, a roar was heard. One of the columns cracked. The protagonist jumped to the side. He looked at it in surprise. Then he opened his mouth and said in surprise that this was simply impossible. The man hit his knee. Tegan rose from under the rubble and hung in the air. He stared at the protagonist. He looked at him and did not understand how he could stay alive. Then he smirked and assumed that this guy realized what was happening and also closed his eyes. Tegan opened his mouth and said about dead water. Then he put his hand in front of him and offered to fight. The guy stood in a confident pose. The hero thought, Tegan, how did he stay alive? The brown-haired man's gaze was determined. With a surprised look, Ijin thought that this guy realized what was happening and also closed his eyes. In the haze, he thought about what it meant. The guy's cheeks turned red as he recalled the images of what had happened, thinking that while everyone was absorbed in greed, surprise, or fear because of the new boss, he was the only one who was openly watching him. The brown-haired man pursed his lips. A swift movement. A fist flew past the brunette's face. A mark from the blow remained on his cheek. Ijin managed to dodge a new attack. His gaze was surprised. Tegan hit with his knee. Ijin held the shield. The opponents stopped opposite each other. The hero grinned, thinking that he needed to calm down. He just needed to use the increase in movement speed. The brown-haired man stood with his arms bent, and then he quickly rushed into the attack. He repeatedly hit the shield. cracks appeared on it. Looking at the shield in surprise, the brunette thought that it was about to collapse. He had to dodge the kick. The guy in the cloak jumped back. He thought with a frown that he relied on one of the red leather feet options. How could he become so cool after playing for such a short time? Standing nearby, Iajin thought that he could easily go solo raid a C+ mob now, and he really was a monster. Clenching his fist, Teaging said that as he thought, he was not that strong in a one-on-one fight. He could not withstand his attacks with such bad equipment. He would finish him off. The brunette held a knife in his hand, and then he smiled. In the haze, his words appeared that he thought so. Smiling, the hero said that he was wearing top-notch loot. His eyes widened in amazement. He saw a glove with a round stone and thought it was a wanderer's glove. The boy stood in a confident pose, while the hero thought that he was wearing smooth stone armor, a victory helmet and cheater's shoes. He had expensive loot, but lacked experience. His gloved hand was clenched into a fist. Iajin thought that he was a big fan of the god of battle Teaging. The brown-haired man raised his hand. The hero thought that when he defeated countless strong opponents, rose to number 1 in Korea, he was even more excited than others. Iajin remembered how he cried in front of the monitor, and thought about how much he cheered for him and called him his mentor. Although he was even older, the attack style of the god of battle was firmly stuck in his head. He chuckled, thinking that a series of strikes that he repeated over and over again. With a wide smile, the boy asked, how can he forget this? The hero dodged the bright attacks of the enemy. Teaging frowned, thinking that it was impossible. He was avoiding his attack as if they had fought 100 times before. It felt like he was fighting a huge fly. The guy with red eyes was getting closer. Iajin smiled slyly, and the opponent thought, what kind of unnerving smile? Was he enjoying the fight? He gritted his teeth. Striking with his fist, he asked, who is he? A knife approached Teaging's throat. He waved his hands, closing himself. The brunette thought with a smile that he had a fragile chin. Squeezing the weapon, he thought that the fatal flaw that made Teaging, a former boxer, retire. Because of this, he is very sensitive when he attacks him in the chin. The brown-haired man's gaze became amazed. He sweated, realizing that his HP was falling. Touching his stomach, Teaging asked, what is he doing? Approaching, the guy with the knife said that they will see each other. He looked ahead attentively. Teaging smiled. His fist collided with the shield. Glancing at it, Iajin thought that he knew that he needed this bronze shield to fight the crying Galatea. The shield shattered into pieces, and the brown-haired man said that he would not die. There was no more shield. He lost. He would get this bronze shield faster and kill Medusa himself. With a slight smile, he said that no one could defeat the monsters that he had not defeated. The hero looked at him silently. The guy confidently clenched his fist, and Iajin thought that it resembled the spirit of the mountain, as expected of a hero from another era. Continuing to watch, he thought that it was admirable, and said what to do now. He knows that he can defeat her with his eyes closed, right? The brown-haired man standing opposite asked in surprise. He saw the boy turn around indignantly and asked what nonsense. How could he defeat a rank monster with his eyes closed? The brunette held up 2 fingers and said that there was no time to explain, just watch the video later when it came out. He imagined the figure of a woman with red eyes. Teaging frowned, thinking that he must be joking. It was impossible. He was really going to defeat her. Iajin walked forward in a cloak, thinking that he would return to Medusa's attack pattern. Cloaking his eyes, he recalled that Medusa's subjugation difficulty was still 5 stars, 3 active skills and 1 passive. She attacks at random. There is a 33% chance of one of the attacks appearing. Remembering the woman with snakes for hair, he thought that in addition, he should anticipate and avoid an attack with his eyes closed. Concentrating on the noises, he can hear more than the sounds of his body. The boy stood with his eyes closed. A sound was heard in the darkness. The brunette waved his hand and said that he was stagnant water and he was a streamer. Iajin smirked and said that he was continuing the quest weeping Galatea. He would challenge Medusa. He remembered the blow to his shield and said that under normal circumstances he would have used it. The shield shattered into pieces, and the guy explained that due to his companion's betrayal, the shield was destroyed, but it was nothing, and should he fight with his eyes closed, he had good hearing, so everything should work. There were red symbols around the woman. The hero explained that she had 3 active skills and 1 passive. Ice flows rose up, the first hellish frost, ice spikes sprouted from the floor. Since he could not see, he needed to listen carefully. Flames rose up, the second wave of hellish flames. The guy remembered how he dodged it and explained that it was burning and spread in a large fire. Of course, if he could not see, he needed to listen carefully. The hero was surrounded by smoke. He said that after dodging these 2 random attacks, he remembered walking with his eyes closed and told him to crawl along the floor to make a physical attack. Since his eyes were closed, he needed to remember where exactly Medusa was. The opponent's eyes were glowing red. Iajin said it was time for the 3rd active skill. A huge black snake appeared from the portal. He said it was the summoning of Jormungandr. Holding a knife, the guy explained that if they were afraid that they would see its size and their fighting spirit would be broken, then they should not worry. It was just a summon. This guy's attack pattern was very simple. The tail moved quickly. The hero said it was a tail strike from top to right. The snake moved along the ground. The guy continued, writhing his body from bottom to right. The cloak flew up from the attack. The hero continued, a headbutt and again repeat, until they can't see, let them dodge. Poking the snake with his weapon, Iojin explained that since it can resist magic, physical attacks are its weak point. To defeat it, one must be focused and attack continuously. Sparks flew. The snake's head fell to the ground. Medusa appeared next to the boy who had his eyes closed, who said that after avoiding the endless hellfire and frost, an enraged woman would approach him. He imagined her waving her arms, turning him into stone, and explained that she would try to use her passive skill, mana burning. Raising his thumb, Iojin said that this meant that her HP was almost depleted. Now should he fight her? He remembered holding the shield, and said that he was originally going to use the bronze shield to finish her off, but it was not the one. Also okay, as always, there is an alternative. The hero clutched a shiny weapon, a bronze sword of an ancient civilization, made by an ancient method. It is too old, the attack power is almost gone, very shiny and perfectly reflects the owner's face. Introducing a figure with a staff, the hero said that they must be thinking, why this? Let me explain something. The bronze blade obtained after defeating the nameless queen harbored the queen's great dislike for the demons and dragons that destroyed her country. Therefore, the item he obtained from her has a distinctive ability against dragons. The damage inflicted will be increased by 100 times. Raising a finger, Iojin said, they can ask what the connection is between Medusa and the feature sharpened for the dragon race. It is easy. Pointing his finger upward, the brunette explained that the monster is classified as a dragon-like. Snakes and dragons, although they seem different, but the methods of dealing with them are similar. To be honest, he thinks that there is some kind of error in the settings of Medusa. He presented the sword, saying that the bronze sword's basic attack power is 80, adding the one-time boost that applies to the dragon flame. He presented the shining sword, saying that it would increase to 8,000 in one hit. The sword was surrounded by a shining haze. Iojin said that on top of that, Medusa also has snake characteristics. She is a monster that is weak to bronze, so the damage is 8,000 and will be increased 4 times. The attack power of the bronze sword from 80 will increase to 32,000. The hero swung the sword, saying that the final attack is finally here. Medusa's eyes glowed red. Iojin grinned with determination. He clutched the sword in his hand. His body turned to stone, and he screamed. A quick movement. With a sharp movement, he cut off the monster's head. The system reported that he was the first player to hunt Medusa. This was the world's first solo Medusa hunt. He was the first to completely clear the secret doll collection. Iojin happily raised his hand with the sword and said that with persistence, fortitude, and a little cunning, they completed the raid. Smiling widely, he said that it was all thanks to the companions who accompanied him. Let them remember that the body is perishable, but the soul is eternal. Stagnant water was with them. Let them subscribe, like, and press the bell. A spark of a fading screen appeared. Iojin happily raised his hand, and then indifferently lowered it. A ring with a red stone appeared in front of him. It is a spirit sealed in a Ranka ring, calling the name. The gray fragment is a piece of the sculpture of crying Galatea. The ivory fragment gives off some ominous feeling. Iojin crossed his arms and said that there is no need to show them the rewards. There are already quite a few ways to deal with the dungeon. He is not sure what to publish, so later. The guy looked in another direction, saying that now. He sat down on the ground. Opposite him was Medusa's head. The guy looked at it carefully. 3 hours later, he was still sitting opposite the head. He grinned and asked if he thought this was the end. He was waiting. Let her show him what she has. Medusa's eyes were closed. They glowed slightly red. The head said that he was still here. Why didn't he leave? Showing his fingers, Iojin said that didn't she have something to tell him? He waited 3 hours to hear it. The gray head was silent. Sitting opposite, the guy heard that she couldn't die like this after being deceived. Since he was the one who killed her, she was sure that he would listen to her request. She imagined the silhouette of a woman entwined with a snake and said that she was originally a human. She fell in love with a black dragon and gave birth to his child. Imagining a baby in a swaddling cloth, she said that now, on her deathbed, she can't stop thinking about this child and can't protect and leave him alone. Medusa with red eyes said that she asks to kill them and send them to the underworld to her. Wincing, Iojin asked again. She asks him to kill the child. Let him not talk nonsense. The woman's lips slightly curved into a smile. A notification about the hidden quest Medusa's mother's love appeared. The system said that the task is to kill the child, the reward is unknown, and offered to accept or decline. Smiling, the brunette said that in any case, he finally got it, another secret quest with a sequel. He imagined a blue monster and thought it was a bronze golem. He remembered a skeleton with a staff and said that the permanent queen. The statue covered her face with her hands. He said, crying Galatea. Introducing a woman with snakes on her head, he continued, and Medusa. In the system window there was an inscription, accept. Iojin looked ahead in surprise. A beam appeared above his palm. He asked, another drop. Looking at the key in his palm, he said that it seemed that after accepting the quest they give an additional item. Looking at the small key, he asked what it was. The system said that it was a dark key. Nothing good would happen if he touched this thing. There were many houses in the city. The guy was sleeping, his hand hanging down. And suddenly he opened his eyes. In front of him was an insect. The cockroach greeted him with a smile and said good morning. Iijin sat up on the bed and said that maybe he should move. Under the blue sky, he heard the words that yes, this is Apricot. He wants to know the details of his account. He sees the summary on the bottom right of the page. There were many houses in the city. The voice said that deposits were made at the end of each month. The withdrawal can be done on Monday of the next week. The commission depends on whether he is an exclusive player or not, but now she is a little busy. The woman walked in front, saying that this house is much cheaper than the average price on the market. He will not be able to find similar offers. It is fully furnished, so he does not have to spend extra money. There is also a gym and a swimming pool on the 4th floor. They are free. You can just come and work out. Later, she will personally send him the details. Let him say his nickname. Standing in the room, Iijin said that the floor is excellent. He does not think there are insects here. The woman said that this is great. When does he plan to move in? The words were heard that the streamer stagnant water. A little later she will transmit the data through, and then the question is who. The man sweating held the phone, saying that his name was Hyung Jun. He was the head of Apricot's support service. It was a great honor for him to talk to him in person. He enjoyed watching his broadcasts. Rumors of the emergence of a super newcomer spread like wildfire. The number of views is constantly growing. They set a new record for the number of donations. It's amazing. If he can spare some time, let him somehow drop by the office, or better yet, let him just say where he is. Come to him no matter what. Holding the phone to his ear, Iijin asked to send him all the information by mail and to comply with the payment deadlines on time. A voice came from the phone in his hand, agreeing, saying that he should not worry if he still finds time later. The hero looked at the screen with displeasure and said that he had only uploaded a couple of streams and even published them under a non-exclusive tag. They were already acting like this. He was sure they wanted to appropriate the rights to his streams or offer him a partnership or something like that. They thought he didn't understand that they would leave him with nothing. Holding a glass with a straw, he said that he had already been through this and would never fall for it again. An organization that unites players, streaming platforms, television, none of them could be trusted. He spat out the drink when something fell in front of him. There were fragments of a monitor on the ground. Looking up with displeasure, the brunette asked what would happen if an honest citizen were passing by. A scream was heard from a window on the top floor. The guy looked up, stunned. Awkwardly walking further, he said that he was not hurt, so he thought maybe he should forget about it. He could distinguish between a game and reality, so it was better to ignore it. Good coffee. Someone at the open window suggested shouting. The guy looked at the burning girl, asked why she broke a perfectly good monitor. Enraged, Da-Hyu clenched her fingers, saying that she would kill this bad man. It was unfair. He had deceived them, but the views on this guy's video continued to grow. There was a tab with videos open on the screen. She asked if he was winding them up. How did a paid video end up on top in the trending tab? She was curious, so she paid too. Chang closed his eyes, hearing that he had gained popularity thanks to Medusa, which they were all hunting for. Covering her eyes with her palm, the girl said that she was so angry that she felt like her head was burning. The brother replied that she was distracting, so let her just calm down and drink something. He looked at the man, who said that he had returned from a gathering event and noticed that his sister was also there. She was lying on the table, confused, and heard that he saw her in the dungeon on the video of the Medusa hunt. Showing the phone, he said that after that he watched all the videos in which his sister was killed, and now he was her fan, and he also joined both the guild and the fan club. The guy calmed his sister down, saying that she knew that he meant well. Da-Hyu froze with a bottle in her hand. Frowning, the red-haired girl heard her ask how many members there were in the guild. Chang answered that there were about 300. Her laughter was heard among the glow. Smiling slyly, the red-haired girl said that there was still a way out. Stagnant water would not get away with it. Her eye was glowing blue. The body of a monster was lying on the ground. A green body was also lying nearby. Words were heard that this was strange. The snake lay with its mouth open. The hero said it was a king cobra with sharp scales. Walking past the bodies, Iijin said, the horned lizard and the camel lechiel, all strong C+ rank monsters. Why are they all dead? He was walking through an abandoned land somewhere in the eastern hemisphere of the Den of Immorality. Looking to the side, the brunette thought that he did not think that someone would visit the dungeon before him. Jumping down, he thought, who came here first? Iijin landed near the blue monster. The blue Oni turned to him. Grinning, Iijin said, what a surprise, he is so huge, I bet no one will get close to him. The hero was surprised when the monster attacked. Dust rose around. Looking at the monster, the hero said that he was lucky, he has business with him. The blue giant swung his leg. With a smile, Iijin said about the earthquake. Raising his foot in a red boot, he said that he would see how it goes. A bright flash rose. Clouds of smoke flew away. The guy in the cloak attacked. About 3 hours later, the monster's head fell to the ground. Looking ahead, Iajin thought a squad was here. No, it looks like one person worked. Besides, arrows were stuck in the monster's body. In the legs as well, the hero realized that he was an archer. In the rapid movement, the guy thought that some archer was trying to make a solo raid. It can't be. The guy in the cloak stood among the rubble. A blinding flash appeared ahead. The hero covered himself with his hand, and then looked away in shock. Hiding, he drank a potion, saying that all he had was this pair of stone slabs and potions. He was naked and completely unprotected. He almost died in the stupidest way. The monster lowered his huge hand. He had white teeth. Sticking out his tongue, the guy thought that it must be. He had never fought him before, but this is Gorgon. Ahead was a horned one-eyed monster. The hero thought that this monster had everything balanced. Strength, speed, endurance. He also had special abilities. He can even use mana burning. Looking from behind cover, he said that in general, he is not an ordinary guy. This is a top-level opponent at the moment. A long-haired guy appeared ahead. The hero thought, who is this? There was a blue scarf around the guy's neck. He held a crossbow in his hand. The brunette's eyes became surprised. Sparks appeared near the stones. A trace remained from a quick jump. Iajin looked ahead in surprise. Having jumped, the player shot at the monster. It raised its head up. The long-haired guy confidently held the crossbow, and then, looking to the side, he exhaled. Iajin smiled, thinking that this was Drake, a professional player who is at the top of not only the official rating. The guy shot at the one-eyed monster. Having mastered the non-standard type of character archer, he became the undisputed #1 in the rating, and many players recognized him as #1 in the world. A paw flew near the fair-haired man, so he received the nickname 1 in 7 billion. A blade appeared in his hand. He became so popular in Korea that he even received a cute nickname Drakey. The paw reached for the guy. One day he suddenly disappeared from the game, but no one knew why he left. Drake looked with yellow eyes. He is a real mystery. This made him famous as a legend. Iajin looked away and thought that he was cornered. The guy stopped, stretching out his hand. The enemy, opening his mouth, ran towards him. Drake grinned and quickly attacked him. The monster looked surprised. It fell sharply to the ground. The brunette stared forward, thinking that it was the same. There was transparent mucus on the paw. He thought it was the gel of snail skeletons. There were many sharp weapons on the ground. The guy thought that there were sharp spikes on the floor. Looking forward, Iajin thought that it was impossible. Such a short period of time, he was able to set such a trap. He remembered how the guy slipped under the paw of the monster. Drake stood with the crossbow in his hand, while the hero thought that this was incredible. The blonde-haired man smiled, thinking that Gorgon's HP had decreased to 5%. Great. He took out a short blade, a weakling sword, which has a feature that helps defeat an enemy with less than 5% of his health left. The blade glowed blue. Looking ahead, Drake thought that this was his 20th attempt. It was time to use the 5% chance. Iajin looked ahead tensely. The long-haired man rushed to attack, thinking that now. The monster's eye glowed red. Drake grinned, asking from the mana burn. The stone on his sword was shining. He said what it was. The impact left a mark. He said that it was bad. The blade pierced the monster's eye. Lightning began to emanate from it. Gorgon fell back. He fell next to the hero. Looking ahead, Drake exclaimed that he did it. He finally defeated this monster. Iajin opened his mouth and shouted at him not to move. The boy turned around, hearing that it was not over yet. A snake appeared in front, the tail of Gorgon. The yellow eyes widened in surprise. He saw the huge Jormungandr chewing on the tail. After all, it is immune to poison and magic. On his finger, a ring with a spirit sealed in it glittered. Standing behind, Iajin said that he did not mean to interrupt. Turning, the blonde asked, did he summon this? The brunette nodded with a slight smile and thought that Drake's meta was originally supposed to be an archer who caused an earthquake that occurred when he fired a barrage of arrows from a long distance, an excellent fighting style. He imagined a red boot and thought that the red leather feet were the item he used. Imagining the blue monster, he thought that if he had defeated the red Oni first and got the earthquake meta, he might not have had to fight Gorgon for so long. With a slight smile, Drake said that he had no use for it. If he died here, he would have nothing to do because the game would block access for a while. The brunette looked surprised. A notification appeared saying that he had successfully completed the world's first Gorgon raid. The solo raid rankings were compiled. Drake in first place, 7 deaths, 182 surrenders, 62 hours 3 minutes 21 seconds. The long-haired man reached for the dropped item, a fragment of Gorgon's horn, and said that they have a saying in their family, pay back a debt twice as much and revenge tenfold. Smiling, he said that he saved his life, so he would definitely save him twice, no less. Iajin looked at him with a slight smile and thought that this was not bad. As a character, he mentally raised his hand and thought that the #1 player in the world promised to save his life twice. In comparison, the reward for killing Gorgon was nothing. On the outside, he smiled calmly and agreed, saying that he would probably use it once, probably right now. Standing next to him, the guy in the cloak said that he planned to reach the very depths of the den of immorality. Drake turned to him and asked again, "Isn't this the lower floor?" Iajin passed by. He approached the stone building. Looking at it carefully, he thought that if the information he had was reliable, the way there lies behind this altar. A flash appeared in the darkness. It was a small keyhole. Smiling, Iajin said that he found it. A dark key hovered above his palm. He inserted the key into the keyhole. Drake watched this in surprise. There were cracks in the ground, and suddenly the floor under the guys collapsed into rubble, causing the blonde to scream. The system reported that they had descended to the hidden location of the Den of Immorality, the 8th floor. The first characters' names were entered into the Akashic Chronicles. The real boss appears. Looking down, Drake said that there really was a hidden floor. Smiling, the cloaked hero said that yes, the final monster he had been walking towards for so long. In front of them was a huge black monster with a long tail and wings, Medusa's son, Basilisk. Light was pouring out of the rift. The black dragon had imprisoned his son in an underground prison before he could rebel. His mother Medusa he had sealed in a statue, so Basilisk was separated from his mother after his birth. The black silhouette of the monster appeared. All this time it had been building up rage towards the black dragon. Iajin exhaled and said that it was quite cruel to imprison his son in the sewers out of fear of being usurped. The black dragon is a coward. Drake added that he did not know about this hidden boss. Smiling, he said that he was excited. The brunette chuckled and clarified what he said. The guy shot down. A spark flew off the monster's armor. Drake looked away questioningly. Iajin, who was standing next to him, said that it was because of his ability called immorality. Looking down, he continued that it was a passive skill that returned 90% of the damage to the attacker. His defense was high, so he would not suffer much damage anyway, but this skill was annoying. A fire ignited in the monster's mouth. Iajin clenched his teeth, saying that he was about to exhale. Flames burst out of the monster's mouth under a cry to dodge. The hero ran away in fear. Sparks flew around the boss's head. Looking there, Drake said that it was a strong poison. He could take damage from a simple impact. He turned around, hearing that the hero would go first. Iajin resolutely jumped into the pit. The confused brown-haired man said that the entire 8th floor was flooded with this poison. There was no room to stand. Looking ahead in surprise, he asked what he was planning. The guy in the cloak stood on the snake's body. The black snake had a red eye. Words were heard that the immunity to Jormungandr poisons was beyond his wildest dreams. Smiling, Iajin said that there would be no problem with the poison as long as he was here. Flames burst from the monster's mouth. The hero's cloak fluttered. He grinned as he clutched the weapon. Suddenly, the ground rose up under him. Looking tensely to the side, he said that it hit the torso. The monster's paw reached for the hero. Suddenly, something hit him in the eye. The brunette turned around, recognizing Drake. He closed his eyes after the shot. Smiling, the brunette said that he helped well. The clothes fluttered from the quick movement. A spark appeared near the torso. The black monster opened its mouth. Drake appeared next to him and said that even with Jormungandr's immunity to poison, they wouldn't last long. Looking ahead, Iajin shouted that they needed to run now. The guys ran up the spiral staircase. The enemy swung his long tail. His blow broke the staircase. The brunette staring ahead said that they needed to go higher. This guy hunts attackers to the very end. Looking back, Drake said that he had excellent defense, the ability to reflect damage, and poison. His HP was also incredibly high, as he thought they should come back more prepared. The hero grinned and asked what he was talking about. He told him. The black monster was quickly approaching from behind. A question was heard, was he really going to hunt him? Glancing back, the long-haired one asked if he was sure he could survive his poison. Iajin clenched his fist, saying that he was actually thinking about it. He imagined the boss, thinking that exiting the dungeon through the basement would take about 2.5 hours, plus the time it would take to finally reduce his HP with point damage. Together, about 3 hours. This would significantly undermine him. Is it possible to avoid Basilisk's poison for so long? Iajin grinned, saying that there is a way out. He will see for himself if he goes with him. Drake grinned and said that he will trust him. The 6th floor. Glancing back, the hero said that this sound is him spraying poison. Let him hurry up and jump to the 5th floor. Green smoke burst out of the monster's mouth. Drake turned around and asked how he could tell the difference between spraying poison and inhaling it. His comrade replied that it could be understood by the sounds, obviously. The hero clarified what he meant and received the answer that when he uses the exhalation of a club of poison, the FPC is 50, and when he sprays poison in the air, 370. Didn't he know that there is a difference of 20 FPC? Not to mention that his tongue moves up and down before exhaling and slightly right and left before spraying. 5th floor. The heroes spread out from the rapid movement. The brunette said that this is the sound of the 3rd octave. These are grenades made of scales. All the scales fly at an angle of 45 degrees, so it is enough to just lie down. 4th floor. Flames flew above the guys. Drake said that every monster on this level could destroy enemies just with a breath of poison. The item said that they were all so strong that he could not kill a single one. 3rd floor. Basilisk's face appeared in the darkness. Looking down, the brunette thought that he still had 80% HP left, and in the meantime, there was less than half to go. The comrade standing behind exclaimed that he would be caught if he just stood there. Iajin turned around and said that he would take a look. He thought it was about time. There were 2 cracked columns ahead. Running up to them, the guy called there. Looking at him in surprise, Drake thought, isn't the exit on the other side? Why here? Suddenly, Basilisk appeared in front of the hero. Sparks fell. Lightning appeared in the haze. Iajin smiled, saying that it was great, just in time. A bright beam shone among the lightning. It crashed into the ground between the opponents. The monster clenched its fangs. He smiled and said that thanks to it, he could buy some time. Standing behind the blue monster, the guy exclaimed like a Pokemon that he chose it. Drake was shocked, turned around to the guy who shouted forward Blue Oni. The blue monster rushed at Basilisk. A reddish haze in the darkness. Blue flashes appeared. Red and blue zigzags merged. The system reported that the fusion of items was complete. Blue Oni stood in front of the monster. Smoke surrounded its muzzle. Drake looked at the brunette in surprise and asked if he had really thought this through, to which he received the answer that of course. Fortunately, they arrived just in time for the Blue Oni to regenerate. Looking ahead, Iajin declared that he would simply attack everyone in his territory, even if that creature was Basilisk, which was 10,000 times stronger. The black paw squeezed the blue one. The hero thought that besides, its strength was enough to mistakenly classify it as a rank higher than C+. Basilisk squeezed the Oni's hands. Iajin thought that he hoped. Black fingers squeezed the wrist. The blue monster screamed. The boss opened its mouth. A stream of flame burst out of it. It surrounded the head of the screaming monster, and then everything disappeared into the haze. Basilisk was standing next to the remains of the skeleton. Iajin quickly ran forward, saying that great, he bought them 10 seconds. The heroes ran up the stairs. The guy thought that Basilisk's HP was now 50%. They had fallen significantly. Turning back, he thought it was worth a try. The monster was smashing the steps. The 1st floor. The guys stopped in front of the huge boss. Drake said that Basilisk was still alive and kicking. It was a shame that they did everything they could. His comrade giggled and asked what he was talking about. They had exhausted themselves so much to get here, could they give up now? He imagined the image of the red monster and thought about his secret item he had patiently prepared all this time. A blue monster appeared in his memory. Imagining the fusion of blue and red, the hero thought that his finest hour had come. In front of him was a boot. The system reported that it was the skin of the legs of Jormungandr, rank B+, attack plus 500, movement speed plus 50, and the ability to use the earthquake skill. These shoes were created by fusing the skin of the legs of red and blue Oni. The boot was put on the hero's foot. With a determined look, looking forward, Iajin said that his preparation for a full-scale dungeon raid was finally finished. Everything was going according to plan. He raised his foot, shouting for him to taste the most devastating area of effect attack that monster's capabilities could offer. The eye on the boot glowed. A scream was heard. It was showtime. Rock debris flew up. There was blue smoke in front of Basilisk. Then he fell into the abyss. The monster fell along with the debris. Looking down, Drake made a surprised sound. Standing next to the rift, he said that this was a terrifying force. The monster's body disappeared into a bright haze. The hero explained that the Den of Immorality is essentially a deep hole between each floor. A lot of space. Basilisk fell from the 1st floor to the 2nd. Wouldn't that cause a huge decrease in HP? The impact caused many cracks. The guy continued that during the fall, his immorality feature would reflect damage to everything around him. Looking down, the brunette continued that the floors were already weakened due to Basilisk's rampage, and his poison was everywhere. Now all this still affects the attack, so while the floor under him will collapse, this is behind the floor. The puzzle monster fell among the rubble. The guy continued, falling lower and lower. He continued to fall into the darkness. Looking down, Iajin said that with each floor he would lose a lot of HP. A crack appeared from the impact. Stones flew up. The monster lay among the rubble. The rubble quickly fell down. The hero continued that the floor would collapse up to the 8th floor. Flying among bright flashes, the monster fell to the ground. The hero explained that in the end there, where it all began. And up was raised a black hand. Looking at the cliff, the brunette said that it will take this guy a long time to get back up again and thought that by then the point damage from the chisel should finish him off. Hearing he continued that from now on it is a battle with time. The guys looked down carefully. Pointing a finger forward, the hero suggested throwing down rocks just in case while they wait. Stroking the snake on the muzzle, Iajin said that he was quite a useful ally. Drake looked ahead. He was absolutely useless and thought that it was necessary to grab popcorn. A notification appeared that they were the first players to complete the Basilisk raid, they were the first to clear the Den of Immorality, completed the hidden quest Mother's Love Medusa and killed the child. Here is the reward. An image of a black armor appeared, which was called the Heart of Immorality. It is in a plus rated armor with plus 500 defense and the ability to use the unique skill Immorality. It is made from a perfectly tailored and perfectly dried basilisk heart skin. Iyajin chuckled, thinking that this is a great drop. He never thought he would get something so unexpected. Now he has to go down to the 8th floor again. Drake looked at him with a smile, saying that he did nothing, so he feels awkward about his name being written in the raid clear. He got the title thanks to hunting basilisk, but not a single item due to his low contribution to the hunt. The brunette retorted that no, it was great for an impromptu team, but that's later. Since he doesn't know the layout of this dungeon, will he help collect the dropped items? Looking at him with a smile, the guy said that there was no need to ask. If anything, there was something else he wanted to do. He should not be shy and say it. The hero looked at him with a slight smile, thinking that he was quite polite. A question was heard, that earlier, when he entered his name in the rating, he said stagnant water. Without turning around, the brunette answered that yes, what? The fair-haired touched his chin. Shifting his gaze, he said that recently many large guilds ordered his murder. Iyajin raised his eyebrows in bewilderment and thought, an order to kill. Staring at the guy in shock, he asked what he meant. He did nothing like that. Waving his hand, his comrade replied that he also received everything simply with a reward. A notification appeared that they were looking for any player with the name Stagnant Water who behaved unusually and rudely. The list of crimes: trolling, stealing monsters, stealing items, killing players, showing off their naked body, stalking, and so on. They are waiting for players who can deal with this problem in cold blood, and then there is the amount of the reward. The hero stares at the system window in bewilderment, saying that this is ridiculous, and there is not a single accusation that he agrees with, except, perhaps, showing off his naked body. Looking to the side, Drake said that it seemed like a lot of people would come for him. How about hiding for a while? He stared forward with a completely gloomy expression, and then he chuckled. A shadow fell on his face and laughter could be heard. Iyajin smiled slyly, saying that they wanted to catch him. It was so cute. He imagined an image and many birds, thinking that imagining the faces of all these newbies who would surround him like chickens, wouldn't it be exciting? Drake was surprised to hear the guy say that before these chickens grew into fighting roosters. The brunette stretched out his palm and asked that getting rid of them early wouldn't be such a bad thing. Among the sands of the harsh B-rank desert, there were black thorns. Sparks flew around the monster. The man clenched his fist, shouting that he was the one who caught it. Let him give it to him. The man with the sword replied that he should take his hands away, or he would cut them off. Pointing his finger, the man asked if he shouldn't apologize if he bumped into someone. Replied, why would he? He bumped into him, wanted to fight. The crowd cursed and pointed their weapons at each other. A quick movement and a shout to everyone. The people turned around in surprise, hearing that they hadn't forgotten why they came here, right? The guy holding the mace, hearing how they were told not to waste their strength. The silhouette of the platform appeared ahead. The girl with the microphone raised her hand, shouting that today they had a common task and only one goal: to kill stagnant water. The red-haired man exclaimed in surprise that it was the leader of the UD Guild. The second exclaimed that it was the beautiful boss. Dahu held the microphone, shouting that they would not lose precious HP by fighting against each other. Who should they point their blades at? The men resolutely shouted stagnant water. The air echoed with a shout in response to the question, who should feel them together? The red-haired girl shouted, who is the bad person they are going to kill? The men raised their hands and shouted. Clenching their fists, the people cheered, shouting the hero's name. The man with the sword asked how she found so many people. He knew that the squad they hired, the secret fan club, was here, but there were no more than 100 people. Here there were more than 500. Dahu put her hand on her hip, saying that it was not only them. Many Chinese tops came too and heard the question, why? She introduced the man on the throne in front of the information window and said that recently a Chinese rich man named Yungshi personally announced a large reward for this bad guy's head. She thought the Chinese players were unhappy with the Koreans taking the initiative. There were sparks in the pink smoke, and words were heard that there were three major forces here: the UD Guild, the Incheon Alliance Guild, and Yungshi's bounty hunters. The girl chuckled, thinking that all these people gathered here to catch stagnant water, even embarrassed by how much stronger they are, but they will get rid of him with confidence. Stepping forward, she said that thanks to him, they will be able to find him. As the guild leader, she is grateful and turned to Drake. The blonde looked at her determinedly, saying that they had to team up for a while, so he knows a little about him. Looking at the guy, the redhead said that she understood what he was getting at. Speaking of which, how did he know his current location? The guy with the blue scarf replied that he was stalking him. He got the information from the player league. Crossing her arms, Dahu asked what he wanted in return and received the answer: money, to which she asked if she planned to kill him and get a reward from both them and the Chinese. Shifting her gaze, Drake said that due to some circumstances, he could not receive a reward from the Chinese. he would transfer the entire amount from their guild, so let him pay him everything. The girl looked at the hero carefully. Imagining the guy with long hair, she thought that Drake was not in the official rankings, so she did not know his level. The guy dodged the claws. She thought that he was already famous in the underground gaming world. She imagined him with a determined look, thinking that as long as he did not oppose the UD guild, this could work. The girl said that it was fine, as long as he definitely finished him off. Turning around, she said that they would see each other later, but the guy stopped her. Da-hyu turned around. Smiling slightly, the blonde man asked, was she by any chance planning to kill him and be done with it? The next day, clouds were floating above the desert. The warriors with weapons gathered together. Clenching his fist, the guy shouted for him to come out already. The red-haired man chuckled, saying that they would incinerate him and cook themselves a roast. Da-hyu held the scroll, thinking that she had spent a lot of money to get this scroll, a lightning strike. She could not let him die until she personally pierced him with her sword. A bright spark appeared in front. More and more. The girl pulled out the melody surrounded by lightning, shouted a death wish. Lightning came from the hands of the warriors. A green ball came from the man's palm. A bright glow went forward. There was a bright flash. The girl looked ahead tensely and thought, did it work? Clouds of dust rose up. Among them, the silhouette of a pile appeared. The amazed players looked at it, shouting, what is this? The girl looked at it in shock. There was a neat pile of shit. Then it disappeared. Dust rose up. Then a lying camel appeared. The man looked at it tensely, exclaiming, what is this? The blonde man in a huge mask exclaimed that he thought he saw a huge poop, and now there is a camel. Did they attack a camel? Frowning, Da-hyu thought, it can't be, they got false information. She used an expensive scroll just for the sake of it. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise. She thought, what is this? An earthquake. The sand hills were really shaking. The cloaked brunette who appeared said with a laugh that they had asked for it. This was a gift from him. Let them enjoy the horror of their first encounter with a monster. A huge monster burst out of the sand. The guy stared ahead in shock, thinking, wasn't it daytime now? It had suddenly gotten dark. He and his comrade looked up in surprise. A huge worm appeared in front of the players. It opened its round, toothy mouth. The girl looked up tensely. With an expression of horror, she screamed, what is this? Sparks of energy flew forward. The worm attacked, scattering parts of the players' bodies. In the desert, there were stone cliffs the day before the raid on stagnant water. Dust rose near the cliffs. Ijin turned around and asked, did he get all the rewards? Drake, who was standing behind him, said that yes, the United Guilds actually wanted to stab each other in the back. They all put a price on the heads of the group leaders. The brunette chuckled and said that of course he expected that from them. In front of him was a whole list of kills with a reward for killing each of the guild leaders. The guy in the cloak looked at his comrade and asked if he had spread the information that he would be there at 2 o'clock, to which he heard the answer that yes, they believed it even easier than they thought. The brunette continued that he was not affiliated with any of the groups, so they should believe that he had no reason to lie to them. As long as he was fighting these 3 guilds, tomorrow he could remove the targets from the list and get the reward. A question was heard in the sandy desert, is this what he planned? Drake looked at the guy, saying that there were already hundreds of people gathered there. Tomorrow there would be even more. Each of them an experienced player, and they all gathered to kill him. Yungshi from the Chinese player base only made things worse. Yellow eyes widened in shock. Ijin closed his eyes with a smile, saying that the name is made up of a part that means snort and a part that means won't tell. Sticking out his tongue, he slyly said that therefore, if someone wanted to know his name, he would have to say that he wouldn't tell. Drake looked at him dumbfounded, and then opened his eyes wide, that it was him, wondering what he was going to do with the crowd that had gathered. The hero replied that he would understand tomorrow. A bloody camel was lying on the ground. A swift movement. A 50-meter-long a plus-rank sandworm was scattering the players' body parts. The red-haired man exclaimed in shock, where did it come from? The players clutched their heads in fear, screaming. Chang frowned, ordering everyone to attack. In front of him was the round mouth of a monster. The people felt an earthquake, and they fell sharply into the abyss. A huge worm towered over the desert. A cry was heard that the monster was causing an earthquake. The blonde man in the huge mask cursed in confusion. The brown-haired man asked with tears on his face, how should they persuade the melee squads to lose their lives in such a way? Da-hyu, who was standing behind them, exclaimed at them not to panic. With a determined look, she shouted that it was an earth or mud type monster, which meant that the damage from ice increased 4 times. Let the magicians use ice attacks at once. And flashes of bright lightning flew. The man hit the monster with an axe. A cry was heard to gather all the guild members. The crowd gathered around the monster, hearing that it was rank A+. Sparks appeared on the monster's body from the attacks. Swift movement. The girl stretched out her hand, ordering to defeat it. The guy added that after spreading the news about the monster, they received more advantages. He grinned slyly and said that when the people who started the battle would soon die, a new wave of the team would end up taking their place. The leader said with a grin that they still had a lot of shells. Lightning surrounded the worm. With a determined look, the girl shouted that just a little more. The gray-haired man addressed her, saying that she was slowly moving into a defensive position. Teak grinned, saying that if they could support the attack, it would definitely not hold out. Rubbing his nose, he said that to be honest, after the mission was over, he had something to tell her. Da-hyu was surprised to see a spark flickering. There was fletching sticking out of the ground, she said. This arrow. Turning around in displeasure, she exclaimed, Drake. Gritting her teeth, the girl said that even if he couldn't kill stagnant water, why kill Teak now? Now she would have to team up with someone else even if they were almost all dead weight. She saw the arrow hit the guy and exclaimed, about her brother. The girl turned around in shock. Behind the rock was the figure of a guy. Drake was holding a weapon. Looking at him in shock, the leader cursed, shouting that he was originally on stagnant water's side. A spark came out of the weapon. A swift movement. Iijin in a black cloak said that if even a newbie like him managed to defeat the sandworm, this kind of pinpoint approach works well. He imagined the lying pile, thinking that stagnant water did not realize that he had summoned Jormungandr to hide thanks to its immunity to magic. Introducing the camel, he continued that for a monster, it had low physical resistance. Things would be a lot easier if they had an archer. Thinking that in the midst of the confusion, he attacked and awakened the sandworm. As those with bounties on their heads, they should have come for it, but now the crowd of newbies seemed to be delayed. Clouds floated across the sky. The monster's mouth was black and scorched. It scattered into ash. The monster fell on its side. The players watched in surprise as it fell next to them. The man in the helmet asked in fear, did it work? The blue-haired player exclaimed, was it defeated? The people raised their hands joyfully, shouting that they did it. They defeated an A+ rank monster, they won, but suddenly the answer was no. The ground beneath their feet shook again, and they exclaimed again. The armored men looked at each other, asking, is it still alive? A leg in a blue and red boot appeared. The hero said that they did not win. The guy in the cloak grinned. Surrounded by sparks, Iijin said with a smile that he won. The armored men asked with displeasure, what is he talking about? Standing in front of the hero, they exclaimed, does he want to take their loot? The brunette grinned, thinking that he could not do this if they did not help him complete the task. His eyes widened. He thought that he could not believe that he actually defeated the sandworm. In his past life, he was defeated for the first time 5 years after the release of the game. He thought with a smile that now only 6 months have passed since the launch, that's 10 times faster. The hero turned around when he heard his name being called. A figure with a sword was approaching him. Surrounded by lightning, Da-hyu shouted that he had lowered his defense. The girl hit the hero in the chest. Da-hyu opened her mouth, screaming that he had weakened his defense. She hit the guy with her sword, wishing stagnant water death. Smiling evilly, the girl said that his defense was poor. She was surprised, barely managing to finish, that he would not survive with such a thing. The sword surrounded by lightning touched the armor. She thought that his skin was covered with something black. Sparks flew, a calling sound was heard. Looking down, Iijin asked if she was not looking at someone's body too openly, so shameless. Red rays threw the girl back. Throwing her head back, she screamed. Looking up in shock, Da-hyu thought why she was taking damage. Could it be that this was a reflection of the damage? The black spikes glowed red, and then they began to dissolve. Looking down, the brunette exhaled. Information about the armor of the Heart of Immorality appeared. Looking at the black palm, Iijin said that it was a bit of a worry, but this relic was amazing. The trait of immorality reflects over 90% of the damage dealt to the attacker. The guy in the cloak heard someone excitedly exclaim that he was alive. Drake looked at him, asking if he hadn't been critically hit. How did he even survive? Iijin replied with a smile that it was nothing, you could say that he was fully armed. The edge of the cloak fluttered. The hero said that since all the guys who attacked the sandworm were killed. The wind fluttered the cloak. The hero continued that the pinpoint damage he dealt finished off the monster, making him the only player to defeat it. Standing next to the monster's body, the guy said that thanks to this, he received another amazing item. The information said that this was a sandworm skin of rank A+, can use the unique traits of foul play and tenacity. The boy imagined himself standing in front of a flaming ball and thought that the sandworm's passive skill known as Fortitude would activate if the user of the shroud had full HP before taking damage and would always leave 1 HP if the user took damage exceeding 10,000 HP. In other words, even if a meteorite destroyed the entire planet, he would survive with 1 HP left. Iijin drank the red potion, saying that with 3 items like this, he wouldn't even need any more regeneration potions. The empty container flew away. The brunette clenched his fist in joy, mentally rejoicing that he got 2 of the top 3 items he was aiming for. He twirled around happily, telling Drake that he was in good shape. Let him watch carefully. Isn't this cool? He replied that all he saw was a pervert in a black leather suit and cloak. The guy crossed his arms and said that he would definitely not be boring, so he would continue to follow him. Iijin smiled. The guy introduced Ah Hugh and asked if he had noticed that she was very skilled. She was able to dodge all of his arrows, escaped, and even tried to deliver the finishing blow. Ijin turned around when he heard a demand from behind him to stay put. The figures standing behind the monster's body were indignant that this was their sandworm, first dressed as a pervert, and now wanted to carry off their prey. He could not steal their reward right in front of them. Ijin looked back with displeasure, saying that they were hiding from this monster, but showed up to complain. Throwing a cloak over his comrade, the brunette said that they were leaving. The player stepped on the monster's body. His face became surprised. He asked where they went. There was only desert sand ahead. The guy said that they dissolved. The wind drove the dust. There was a brown cloth on the sand. The boys hid under the sandworm skin, which reduces the chance of being noticed by the player or monster by 50%. Ijin said that he was sure that they were newbies with 6 months of experience, so this disguise was enough. Now they could go to a safe place to log out. The heroes looked ahead carefully. Lying under the skin, they both thought it was awkward. Under the sky, the hero thought that because he was technically naked, his stomach was growling too loudly. White clouds were floating in the sky. There was a sign on the brick building. From the video on the screen, words were heard that this was the end of their review of the Red Oni, one of the 3 main bosses in the newbie area. Next time he will talk about the long sword of the Needle King Cobra. Let them not forget to like, share the video and subscribe. It was stagnant water, disconnecting. The guy with the phone exclaimed how cool he was. The other said it was amazing how he could explain things so well while fighting an Oni. The student sat with his head on his hand. Teaging turned around when he was called. 2 guys approached him. With an indifferent look, the professional player of the K1 Soul branch asked what they wanted. The blonde looked at him awkwardly. Standing next to him, he hesitantly said that it was nothing, just what they talked about last time. He wanted to know if he got them. His hand squeezed the handle of his backpack. As he walked away, Teaging said that if he meant the hunter's bandana and the bold armor, he already had them. He interrupted the thanks, saying that there was nothing to thank him for, just to get the money ready. The blonde standing behind him asked displeasedly why he was leaving. The class hour had not even started yet. Looking after him, he sadly thought that he had hoped they could play together. White clouds floated across the sky. Teaging looked ahead with dissatisfaction, saying that he couldn't continue to earn so little. Professional gamer groups forbid their members from participating in other commercial projects. He walked with his hand in his pocket, thinking that the regulations monopolized the players. Because he dropped out of school, he had nowhere to go. He walked down the city street, thinking that when he tried to stay in the dorm, it was annoying because everything the older ones did was gather all the younger ones and make them do everything for them. The house is empty because his parents work day and night to pay for his younger sister's treatment. There was a bright building ahead. Teaging thought that he wanted to debut quickly to participate in tournaments, but with his history and the school's interference, even that would be difficult. He closed his eyes and said that since he was a rookie who hadn't even debuted, he couldn't get anything from sponsorship or advertising. He had to earn money somehow. Something black was flying quickly. Teaging caught it with his hand. He looked at it and asked, "What is it?" He was holding a blue poster of the East Pacific ship, Toto League, which said that there was a cash prize of 1 billion won and that they were looking for the best young professional players in Korea. If you wanted to bet, all types were allowed. Feel free to call, come and become a superstar. White clouds were floating in the sky. There was a car parked not far from the house. The woman in pink was shouting discontentedly, so this is how he decided to spend his father's inheritance. The man in the tie reminded the older man that he had said that he could get a bigger share. The man angrily shouted that he had his own needs too, if he had forgotten, and besides, he was the oldest of them. He should give them a bigger share. Ijin heard someone shouting with an awkward smile. Did they think that this conversation was not only about them? The guy held the phone to his ear, thinking that for the first time in a long time he decided to come visit his uncle. On the phone, he was told that a memorial service would be coming soon, so he needed to come at least a week before they arrived. The displeased uncle asked the hero if he thought he had crossed the line. The guy awkwardly asked again. The man opened his mouth in displeasure and shouted that he was already at the age to go to college, find a job and become completely independent. He expected them to still pay the bills and fuss over him. The boys looked ahead in confusion as he ordered him to look at his cousins. They hadn't relied on their parents since they started going to school, and how good was he at school? The cousins chuckled a little. Spitting out saliva, the man yelled that no, he was just sitting there playing his stupid games, and now he sees the difference between him and those who have real jobs. Ijin let out a sigh, dejected, thinking that who knew he would make a speech to pretend that he was actually protecting him. The children held their phones. The man waved his hand, telling his brother that he was sure Ijin thought about such things. But he angrily replied that he didn't, and then said that they would return to their common problem. They needed to discuss it together. The indifferent brunette listened, that it was about his grandfather's inheritance. It shouldn't be a surprise, since they all knew that he was no longer with them. The boy smiled and asked how much he had left. He asked again in surprise when he heard the man put a 20 and 2 zeros next to it. The furious man, spitting, shouted that so much money was no joke. He was too inadequate to understand what it meant to have so much money. Ieogen raised an eyebrow pitifully, thinking it was only 2,000. He hoped in vain. He wondered how they would react if they knew that he had earned 40 million in 3 months. The man held up the papers, saying that the paperwork seemed quite complicated in this case. The man with glasses heard him ask for permission to help. Ieogen raised a finger and said that he would submit these documents to the district office and ask for a geographic survey and the issuance of documents for land distribution. It should not take long. The relative froze in dismay, and then pointed his finger in displeasure, shouting why he was butting into the adults' conversations. Ieogen smiled sweetly and said that he just wanted to offer his help, but if they didn't want to involve him, that was fine. Sitting with his legs tucked under him, he continued that it seemed like the inheritance request hadn't come through from the local courts yet, so the whole process would take at least a week. If they went to the registry office later and got the registration number, the inheritance would get a new number. The cousins were displeased to hear that only after that would the inheritance registration process be transferred to them, but they would need to prepare the land transfer application and official seal in advance. They would also need to choose the right seal and a suitable representative to oversee the process. The bespectacled man smiled, saying that if they thought about it, they could really use his help. The brunette said with a smile that they would leave the inheritance worries to him. Ieogen smiled. His uncle grinned darkly. The guy thought that he had learned all this in his past life after he had set him up. In the bluish space, words were heard that by the way about this. The guys surrounded the hero and asked what he was doing these days, since he should not go to college. The cousin with glasses smiled, saying that he was 21, so it was a little late, but perhaps if he started studying now, he could still take a place at a lower level. The second brunette said that he was older than him, he could tutor him if he did not know how to study. Ieogen looked at them with displeasure, hearing that he should go to college at any cost. Then he turned his gaze. The children continued to look at their phones. The uncle shouted at them with displeasure that they were sitting in their phones all this time, as if glued to the screens. He smiled nastily, saying that perhaps they wanted to end up like their elder Ieogen. Arching his eyebrows, the brunette thought that he had already started on the children. He knew how much pressure they would be under from their parents. He imagined a boy studying, being told that his brothers had become doctors and lawyers. Do they think it's enough for them to work all night? A girl wiped away tears, hearing that they should be doctors or lawyers like their brothers. Their parents, spitting, said that it was for their own good. The brother with glasses smiled. The hero thought that 15 years later, the older brother, a paid medical practitioner, caused a major medical scandal and became an alcoholic after leaving the hospital. Remembering the brunette looking down, the hero thought that the younger brother, who became a lawyer, saw his business fail and got divorced thanks to his trademark arrogance. In the end, they used up all of his uncle's severance pay and pension fund and tried to encroach on his property as well. Clenching his fist, Ieogen thought resolutely that he would not return to his old life and would not allow this to happen. The uncle turned around with displeasure, asking who was there. Hadn't everyone arrived? Throwing open the door, he yelled, "Who is this guy who parks so loudly in front of someone else's house? If they want to park, can they do it somewhere else?" Opening his mouth, he saw the truck, asking which house did they even come to. Ieogen, who appeared behind him, smiled and apologized for that. With a sweet smile, he said that in fact, it was to him. A shout was heard to the dear customer that his order had arrived. The headlights of a car appeared. In the cabin of the truck was a luxury car. The cousins' mouths opened in shock, exclaiming that it was a Morse Crocodile L3021. The children stared ahead in admiration, saying how cool it was. Ieogen signed for the delivery man, saying that this was an inimitable service. The delivery man said that delivery was a service that was included in the order. The door of the blue car opened. Holding his jacket in his hand, the boy said that they had discussed the main things about the inheritance, so if there were any other problems, they should contact him. He had important things to do, so he left. His relatives watched him get into the car with their mouths open. The uncle looked extremely surprised. The sky was clear. Opening his mouth in displeasure, he shouted that they were looking at their phones again. How many times had he told them to study? Frowning, he continued, unless they wanted to become like Ieogen. Then his eyes widened in shock. Holding the phone, the boy said that they wanted to be cool like him. A video was open on the phone screen, and words about likes, subscriptions, and that stagnant water was with them could be heard. Rapid movement. The car moved forward quickly. The boy said that it was really a waste of time. He tried to give them a chance. With a smile, sitting behind the wheel, he continued that in any case, the moment had come, the big event that everyone had been waiting for. On the seat was a crumpled poster. In South Atlantic, the Amazon, a red beam was rising from the device. Words were heard that the Asian Toto League was finally starting. The man spread his arms, saying that he thanked everyone for joining them today, whose decisive victory would bring the player a huge prize of 1 billion won. The girls had masks with ears on their faces. Words were heard that today's match had already begun. This was the first duel in honor of the opening of the event. A long-haired man in armor stood in a confident pose. Words were heard that their first player was a private league participant with impressive skills and past experience defeating opponents in this tournament, number 48 PK Joe. The man smiled widely. The guy was warming up his hand. Words were heard that on the other side was a newcomer to the event, number 9 Machios. The guy looked forward with determination. The words were heard that this was the first duel in honor of the opening of the event. The brunette grinned predatory. The host continued, number 9 Machios against number 48 PK Joe. The participants stood opposite each other. The audience chanted PK Joe's name. Someone asked, who is the second? In the stands there were blue figures of temporary avatars to hide the identity of the participant. A question was heard, didn't they hear that he had a Korean accent when he spoke earlier? Another exclaimed that there was no way he would bet on Korea. Japan would definitely not lose. This was probably a child with a fake avatar created to bypass the law on the closure. In the orange glow, the order was heard to get ready and begin. PK Joe with a predatory smile pulled out a sword, saying that everything will be over in an instant. A quick move, a quick draw. A powerful energy crumpled his face. The guy standing opposite attacked. The fingers were clenched into a fist. The man thought he couldn't even react. T-Gang looked forward resolutely. The brunette frowned, saying that he was an impudent child. A bright flash came from the attack. The brown-haired man hit him in the side. A glow appeared next to PK Joe's face. The blow threw his head back. The screen showed the intro that number 9 Machios had won. A scream was heard that it was incredible. Against all expectations, the fan favorite PK Joe had been defeated. Number 9 Machios had won. The guy was standing next to his prostrate opponent. The spectators in the stands were discussing where he came from. Someone was betting on him. The chances that he would lose were 8-1. The brown-haired man frowned, thinking that this was to be expected. In tournaments like this you have to hide your identity. So the standard attack patterns of fake avatars are used. A bunch of nameless ones who awkwardly adapt to unfamiliar equipment. No problem, the victory will be his. A red beam emanated from the device. The host said that it was unpleasant to lose money, but they should not be so sad. Now he had better try to win the next fight. Who will be next? The guy smiled, thinking that out of a total of 50 participants, 25 survived, another 12 people were eliminated, then only 7 remained. Being part of 3 participants who are claiming the prize money, he needs to win 3 more times. The host with a mustache exclaimed that the atmosphere is heating up. The next confrontation will begin soon. The bet number 9 Machios appeared on the screen against number 21 Stagnant Water in Korean writing. The guy's eyes widened. He said not to tell him that this guy is also here. A man in a black cloak appeared. There was a black mask on his face. He heard the words, stagnant water, is it really him? Blue eyes looked forward. Frowning slightly, T-Gang thought it was an imposter. Standing in front of the guy in the mask, he thought that this shorty was clearly not 2 meters tall compared to their last meeting in the dungeon. His height had changed by at least 20 centimeters. It was impossible to grow like that, even if he ate well. The man in the white mask told him to start. A cry of the beginning was heard against the orange background. The player was clutching a spear in his hand. An eye flashed in the slit of the mask. The guy said, "Come closer." None of his blows would reach the target. The brown-haired man continued to stand, and then he grinned. Stagnant Water was surprised by the rapid movement. Machios was quickly approaching him. Flashes appeared from the blows. The guy clenched his fists. Then he attacked under the knee. The brunette in the mask made a dissatisfied sound. A red beam appeared from the attack. The hand was clutching the blade of the hedgehog needle from the dungeon. Looking at this, the blue-eyed guy thought that he was a melee player, but chose the style of this. Probably he has low HP. The masked guy's cloak was fluttering. The hero thought that he had an advantage in a large reserve of HP. That's why he should develop melee skills. Not to mention that this guy's speed is much lower than the real one. He dared to pretend to be naked in front of him. Clenching his fist, T-Gang thought that he asked for it himself. Resolutely knitting his eyebrows, he offered to dance. The stone on his forged glove of rank C+ glowed. An orange haze surrounded the enemy. The masked guy cursed that he had become even faster. The fist was surrounded by bright swirls. The glow was getting brighter. Clenching his fists, the guy appeared on fire. The avatars in the stands were discussing that this guy was a professional player. These were fire fists, amazing. The round stone on the glove was shining. The guy thought about a full charge. Flames were coming from his fingers. Gritting his teeth, T-Gang thought that this was the attack he was waiting for. Let him receive it. A vein bulged on the brunette's neck. People were discussing that Stagnant Water was so weak, he came here for 2 rounds. The brown-haired man's eyes became amazed. He remembered scenes from the past, a dark figure, a guy in a cloak, flying debris, the brunette's rapid attacks, flying bright sparks, the way he frowned forward, and how Iajin showed him 2 fingers and cursed in his mind. Flashes appeared in the fire. The man in the cloak slid back. Clenching his fist, T-Gang thought that the one who could beat him in a one-on-one duel, which he thought was impossible, the one who could complete dungeon raids on his own and succeed where professional players failed. He looked forward resolutely, thinking that he was missing even a part of his aura, and demanded to reveal his real face. The face of a dissatisfied man appeared. The spectators asked, "How is this possible?" The avatars in the stands were discussing the Lord of Western Chukos. He is a professional player who ranks 3rd in China, 6th in Asia Coast. The man chuckled, and then cursed. There was a white pattern on the round shield. He said that he was tired of hiding his style. Sparks flew from the tip. The man continued that in a situation like this, it would be pointless to give up on victory, right? He would get the prize money, but the bettors would cut him out. T-Gang looked forward resolutely. The man in the golden armor told him to come here now. This time it would be different. T-Gang clenched his fist. A bright flash appeared near the armor. Kos only chuckled. Smiling, he asked, decided to tickle him. Didn't he tell him that this time it was serious? Sparks flew. The attack left a bright trace. Covering himself with his hand, the brown-haired man thought that he was too strong. If he really hit, then the end is near. Looking ahead sullenly, he thought that, in addition, despite his size, he was too fast. First he should create distance. The guy took a step back. Kos smiled wider and said that he was scared. Let him come closer. He does not bite. As if raising his sword, he exclaimed that he would show him the power of the Great China. Bright rays crashed. The guy froze, thinking that this was a long-range attack. He frowned at the flash. He jumped aside from the rising beams. The hero gritted his teeth, and was surprised when the man appeared behind him. T-Gang shifted his gaze. Kos hit him from top to bottom. Dust rose from the beam. Sparks flew in all directions. The brown-haired man held the sword with his hands. With a wide smile, the brunette said that it looked like his HP was already running out. What would he do next? The armor on his hands cracked. A demand was heard to answer what he would do next. The hero gritted his teeth. He closed his eyes and said stop. He gives up. The screen showed the inscription that number 21 won. Words were heard in the blue glow. Who could have thought that the ruler of the West Coast himself would be here? They saw the expression on the guy from Korea's face when he gave up. But we need to go back to the question, what is a professional player with a 6-figure salary doing here? The man in armor said that this Korean does not have an ounce of courage. The avatars in the stands heard that the next opponent would be the contestant number 3. Who is it? He hadn't seen him before, and besides, he barely got out of the nameless group. Then he should definitely bet on number 21. There was no one in this league who could defeat Kos. The guy walked away. As he walked forward, he thought that this was a waste of time. The Lord of the West Coast was impressive. The hero remembered the flashy attack and thought that close combat using an overwhelming amount of physical attacks and net speed. He remembered how the man raised his sword and thought that even his attempt to pretend to be stagnant water was only successful because he was confident in his fighting style, using an evasion that was completely opposite to his own. I wonder who would win if he faced the real stagnant water. Closing his eyes, T-Gang thought that he couldn't earn a penny this time. It was a shame. He thought he should take this as a learning experience. The guy opened his eyes when he heard someone greet him. There was a powerful armor on his arm. A man in red armor stood in front. There was a red mask on his face. Frowning, T-Gang thought, who is this? Does he know him? As he passed by, the man said that he was curious about something. The guy turned around, looking at him, and heard what was said before. Stopping behind, the player continued that it would have been the end for him if he had hit him in the stomach. But why did he continue to attack him in the chin? Why did he make such a mistake at such an important time? The brown-haired man's eyes widened in surprise. He thought about this guy. How is he? Thoughts flashed through his mind that perhaps stagnant water is not that strong. The guy clenched his teeth in displeasure. Then he turned around and said that he didn't know what he was talking about and why did he care about his fight. He opened his eyes when he was asked to let him say one thing. The armored hand rose and the man said that in the next round of betting. The guy looked surprised when he was asked to bet all in on him. The man walked forward and showed 2 fingers. The guy remembered Iajin showing the same gesture. His eyes became amazed. Turning to the man in armor, he exclaimed that he was stagnant water. The screen also showed the images of the participants and heard words saying that the next fight was now participant number 21 Goinmul against number 3 Madingwang. Kos scratched his ear and said that the Koreans have no courage. Did he agree? The masked player was silent. The man opened his eyes slightly. He made an inviting gesture and said that he was so confident. Let him start. The man in red knelt down on one knee. The weapon on his hand touched the ground. Bright rays flew from it. The brunette clenched his teeth, thinking that the arena was shaking. His knees were shaking. He exclaimed that he could not stand. The enemy approached him. The eyes of the slit of the mask were burning, and words were heard that he had begun. He grabbed the man's face with his hand. On the screen was a video splash screen. Words were heard asking to like, subscribe, and not forget to like other videos. On the screen were preview images. The hero thought that all his broadcasts were becoming popular, each of them gaining more than 1 million views immediately after publication, and this despite the fact that you have to pay to watch them. Iijin ran forward, thinking that the sponsorship and advertising revenue he received was impressive enough. Running forward, the hero thought that, however, such income would not be enough for his plans for the future. He had a long way to go. Rapid movement, the guy thought that there must be a better and more profitable way than just streaming dungeon raids. Suddenly, a piece of paper flew into his face. He took it off and saw a blue poster. A red beam was rising up. Iijin thought that this was a private and illegal tournament for players. The Toto League, he still remembers all the pro players from the ratings, so he knows with almost 100% certainty who will win and who will not. In short, victory is in his pocket. In red armor and a helmet, he sat among the avatars. There was a wide smile on his face. The guy thought that he joined the league to bet on the winners and losers of each fight. The brown-haired man stood in the ring. The hero thought, isn't this T-Gang? Sitting in the stands, Iijin thought that he registered in an illegal league of players. He did not think that this could happen, although he is not very familiar with his personal life. The brunette had a mask on his face. He thought that judging by the incredible height and nationality of his opponent, it was probably the overlord of Western Chu. No wonder such rumors spread. After all, he really participated in an illegal league. Crossing his arms, the hero thought that he was undoubtedly still #1 in Asia, but at this moment, the overlord was the one who, he may be a fan of T-Gang, but the money he bet was on the line. The hero's eyes widened. He raised his hand, encouraging Machios, although he himself bet everything on Kos. 10 minutes later, flashes erupted from the blows. Iijin swung his fist, shouting, why is he going on the defensive? What is his problem? He can't stay so quickly. The guy's fist was engulfed in flames. He hit his opponent in the chin. The armored guy froze, thinking why he suddenly changed the trajectory of this blow. No matter what, he would be able to keep his 3 million thanks to T-Gang's mistake. Moreover, his investment would double. As a result, his next opponent, a certain one, would make a noise. A swift movement. The hero hit the opponent's face. Blood splashed out of Kos's nose. The sword was surrounded by fire. The brunette clenched his teeth. Bright flashes remained from the movement. T-Gang looked ahead in surprise, thinking that he understood. The arm in the armor was glowing. On it was the golem's infinity gauntlet. Looking ahead carefully, the brown-haired man thought that they had great attack power, but after a successful attack, the recoil causes the player to be paralyzed for half a second. That's why he wanted to cope with powerful attacks from a distance. It turns out that the best tactic against the guy is, the guy attacked the enemy in the cheek. Clenching his fist, the red player voiced his thought, close combat. In close combat, half a second is an eternity. A bright blow crushed the cheek of Kos, who said about long-range attacks, he needs to close the distance. A flash appeared between them. Iijin in a red mask said that it was a pity, but he would not let this happen. On his hand was a weapon in the form of antlion claws. He said that he would not escape from him. Many lightnings flew around. Kos gritted his teeth, saying, another earthquake, how can he still do this? He fell to the floor. His hand touched the ground. His fingers touched white crumbs. He thought that the earth was turning into sand. Bright flashes of special claw skill, whirlwind flew around the hero. Imagining the silhouette of a warrior, he thought of Dongwang. When he thought of who to pretend to be in this league, a specific person appeared in his mind. Indeed, he was the symbol of the macho of the game. While imagining the men standing back to back, he thought that along with T-Gang, he was one of the top players in the Korean rankings, but unlike Tuzan, he could not earn recognition. Iijin imagined the armor, thinking that just a year after his debut, he was quickly forgotten in the gaming industry when it turned out that he was involved in a match-fixing scandal. While imagining the armor details, he thought that because of him, the professional league almost went through a terrible crisis. It took a year and a half before he was allowed to participate again. He already knew what skills Dongwang used for his debut. He thought that his actions hurt both the leagues and the fans. Iijin smiled, saying that he was using them now. He was surrounded by bright lightning. Kos gritted his teeth, saying that this was not just an earthquake. His body was being pulled into the center. The tip of the sword was lowered. He thought that if he screwed up when attacking, he would not miss this chance. The guy in the mask stood. The eye in the slit glowed white. The man looked extremely scared. A bright ball appeared near the sword. The brunette swung it, leaving a bright trace. Kos opened his mouth in shock when Iijin approached, reminding him that he said he would not escape from him. A fist crashed into his face, along with bright beams. Many beams crashed into the body of the man who said that it was impossible. Clenching his fist, the player asked what was wrong. He said something. Maybe it was because of his large build, but he was holding up well. Iijin clenched his fist surrounded by beams. Kos lay in the rubble of broken armor. The player in red armor stood confidently. Words were heard. What just happened? He did not even think that it was possible to fight in such a way. Impressive. The avatars in the stands rejoiced. Words were heard that this force is stunning. Dongwang broke into the ratings. The guy looked ahead, saying that so much time had passed. No, something else was more important. The hero in red armor stood sideways. His fingers were clenched into a fist. The brown-haired man smiled, saying that it was amazing. The hero clenched the blade and looked ahead in shock. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that this was crazy. Two red eyes flashed in front of him, and he tried to understand what it was. The brunette frowned and sweated, turning his head. Iijin swung his weapon and shouted. The pink-haired girl looked up in confusion, not understanding how everything came to this. Blood splattered on the wall. A week earlier, a cafe in the Gangnam district. The girl closed her eyes and took a breath. The youngest producer of the LGB program from Beginnings to the Crown, Hong Yong HWA, sat and worried that she had come too early. She opened the front camera and checked if her makeup and hair were in order. The girl blushed and muttered with a smile that she never thought stagnant water would respond to her, and the meeting itself was not long ago when a response to an email sent without much hope came. Yong HWA sat at her laptop and looked at the person she had stumbled upon while searching for a guest for her show. The screen flashed clips of Stagnant Water's streams, a man who had topped the charts of all streaming platforms, and whose incredible control over his own skills had earned him international fame. She opened the page with the videos and noted that famous brands were already trying to launch ads on his channel, and before anyone knew it, he had already become a celebrity. The pink-haired girl sat back and wondered if such a person would respond to her email. She typed out a message, deciding that she should give it a try. She quickly received a response agreeing to participate. Yong HWA enthusiastically picked up the laptop and blushed. The girl smiled awkwardly and muttered that she was sure he would ignore her, because it was hard to believe that a star of such stature would agree to take part in a new show on a small TV and radio station, especially considering that From Beginnings to the Crown didn't have such high ratings, so everyone there was excited. A little earlier, her colleagues had been fussing and trying to tidy up the girl, choosing her clothes and doing her hair. Yong HWA put the straw in her mouth and noted that she was so nervous that she didn't know if she would be able to speak at all, and it would be better not to blurt out too much or with a strange pronunciation. She flinched when she heard the sound. The man adjusted his cap. A guy in a mask and dark glasses walked inside. The girl turned around and thought that it must be Stagnant Water. She jumped up and waved at him, and he was surprised to think why she was talking with a straw in her mouth. He put his glasses on the table, and at that moment the girl said that she was glad to meet him. The interlocutors looked at each other, and the young man said that there was no need to stare like that. Yong HWA flinched and smiled awkwardly. The girl scratched the back of her head and muttered that she was uncomfortable seeing him in clothes, because he was always naked, and the brunette reminded them that they were in reality now, not in a game. The hero narrowed his eyes and wondered if she had arrived 2 hours earlier or if he had messed something up and misunderstood her letter. The pink-haired girl looked at the interlocutor with confusion, and Iijin mentally greeted the girl from the LGB poster, remembering that From Beginnings to the Crown was a program that would turn their small TV and radio station into the #1 gaming broadcasting service in Korea. He pictured the office building and noted that it was a station that had perfected the art of VR broadcasting since its launch, something the guy was attached to. The hero looked at the interlocutor and said that he had already thought about the content for the broadcasts, but thought it would be difficult to broadcast it in HD quality with his current equipment, so he wanted to get help from experts. The girl nodded when the brunette added that it was a project that he wanted to show his viewers in a good quality video. The guy presented the document on the table and remembered that unfortunately, in 5 years, LGB would face management difficulties and would be forced to merge with Chinese investors, after which From Beginnings to the Crown would grow in popularity, but without being able to capitalize on its potential, the company would disband. Yong HWA looked at the man with a smile and said that their CEO was a big fan of his and he wanted to meet him, but the guy retorted that the boss would have come by then, to which the girl said that she was not exaggerating. It was just that the man had a heart attack when he heard about Stagnant Water's response and was taken to the hospital. Iijin sighed as he looked at her and mentally asked him not to screw up this time. The pink-haired girl leaned over and asked what type of content he was planning on making, and the boy noted that she was impatient and asked what if they were disappointed. The woman smiled and exclaimed that what Stagnant Water had brought would not disappoint her, because it would top the charts anyway. The guy closed his eyes and wondered if she would have spoken like that if he had been standing there picking his nose. The brunette pulled back his mask and noted that he had come here thinking about how to convince them, but it seemed there was no need for that. He leaned his elbows on the table and declared that he was going to go through the Tomb of the Brave. The girl stared at him in admiration, her eyes shining, after which her surprised exclamation was heard throughout the cafe. The protagonist imagined a tall building and remembered that the Tomb of the Brave was a tower that had 108 floors in an event dungeon, a place where players competed to see who could climb the highest in the least amount of time, and it was currently the most popular event in DEM, so there was fierce competition between players from several world rankings. The other visitors turned around questioningly when the girl exclaimed that Stagnant Water would challenge the Tomb of the Brave. She jumped up and said that the current first place in the rankings was held by a raid conducted by an alliance of France, the United States, and Korea, but they had only reached the 45th floor, and the record was set 6 months after DEM opened, but no one had been able to beat it even after another 4 months. Eugene stared at her in surprise and mentally noted that she was very talkative when it came to the game. Young HWA smiled with anticipation and said that it would definitely be great content, and if it was him, he would be able to reach the 46th floor of hell, and no matter what others said, he was the unofficial #1 in Korea. The brunette smiled and thought that if this broadcast was successful, LGB would have a chance to go viral, but wasn't she being too confident? The guy smirked and remembered that he had another reason, and the girl kept shouting that stagnant water would definitely be able to do it, and the hero and the waiter asked her to calm down. 1 week later, the sky was covered with clouds. The hero was standing in front of the Tomb of the Brave. The guy looked ahead and asked if the broadcast was going on now. He turned to the blue light, the camera in support mode, and Young HWA replied that she couldn't go on air right away. The girl was sitting at her laptop with headphones on and was saying that after recording the video in HD format, she needed to do the timing and write subtitles, and also edit the frames, so there was a lot of work. The tower was hidden behind the clouds. It was an event dungeon created in the likeness of the 108 earthly filths, and the participants needed to defeat the monsters that multiply on each floor. The hero mentally divided the tower into several levels of difficulty and thought that the ranks of the monsters increased depending on the floor. His body began to be covered with black energy, and the guy noted that even after 15 years, this place had not been completely cleared. He smiled and thought that the last thing he remembered from the future was the news that the 106th floor had been cleared, and 10 months had already passed since the launch of the game. At the moment, the record is still the 45th floor. Eugene frowned and decided that it would be nice to break records, but he was not interested in advancing in ranks. The brunette smiled and reminded himself that his real goal was to find a clue to obtain the last of the 3 artifacts. The hero grinned and exclaimed that he hated standing still and asked the girl to watch and enjoy how he would break all the records, and Young HWA happily supported his mood. The guy ran forward, shouting that the world record should be waiting for them. Blood spurted. The protagonist narrowed his eyes and gritted his teeth, pointing his blade. He frowned and shouted loudly. Eugene crouched down and thought that he couldn't give up, because if this continued, he would die and he couldn't lose. The young man clenched his weapon and indignantly noted that a bunch of nerds had overtaken him. The brunette sweated and, gritting his teeth, decided that he had to defeat them. The boy swung his arm and shouted for the enemy to attack. The blue flame looked ahead in confusion and asked what the hell that was. The protagonist raised his hands and exclaimed that he had won. There was a red puddle on the floor, a C-rank queen slime, specialty, regeneration, habitat, all continents. The boy wiped his sweat and muttered that he was close to giving up, and the girl exclaimed how he could have spent 2 whole hours fighting a normal slime. Eugene pointed and countered that the queen slime was a monster with the widest attack range in DEM, and there was no strategy to dodge its special attack pudding packet. Young HWA smiled tightly when the protagonist said that he would have definitely been flattened if he had gotten caught in her attack range, after which the girl muttered that he tried well, but the protagonist thought that he had wasted too much time on the first floor. The brunette moved forward, saying that it should be easier from now on since they defeated a relatively cunning monster. Then the monsters followed one after another, but the hero won until he received a notification that he had ascended to the 46th floor of the Tomb of the Brave. The guy stood in front of a huge creature. Young HWA looked at her companion in shock and exclaimed that he had passed from the 2nd to the 46th floor without damage. The black monster opened its mouth. It was a B+ rank Kaitamaru with the features of giant, demon, stealthy, earthquake, hybrid. Its habitat is the burning rotting lands in the kingdom of giants, and its size is 45 meters. The hero grinned and muttered that he hadn't seen him for a long time. The guy looked at the enemy and noted that he did not expect this guy to appear here, which was an unexpected bonus, and offered him a dance. The monster broke 2 columns in front of him. The brunette bit his finger until it bled and frowned. The young man waved his hand, brushing away the blood, because one of the basilisk's features is poison, and it poisons the blood of the one you aim at. The monster stepped right on the drops of blood on the floor. Kaitamaru roared and flinched, feeling pain. Eugene grinned and exclaimed that this is the basilisk's poison, which is 2 ranks higher than his. The enemy stepped hard on the ground. The monster spread its paws and released powerful energy. The protagonist crouched to the ground, and his cloak fluttered. The brunette grinned and noted that his physical strength was incredible, but his attacks were too easy to predict, so the outcome of this battle was determined. The guy looked warily to the side and remembered that one of Kaitamaru's features was stealth. The monster was sitting on the ceiling, and the boy thought that their habit of hanging upside down like bats did not seem like a natural distinguishing feature given their size, which is why other players were getting too close and letting him strike first. The brunette frowned and tensed up. He bared his teeth and thought that they could not hide their distinctive smell. The monster suddenly jumped out and struck. The monster opened its mouth, sparks appeared around it. The creature screamed and attacked with a fireball. The hero raised his hand with the spirit sealed in a ring, which has plus 300 magic power and can summon Jormungandr, and shouted, "Not so fast." He frowned, and the attack passed him by. The boy took out his blade and swung. Eogen began to run around the enemy, delivering slashes. With a sharp movement, the boy cut off several limbs of the monster. He jumped up and plunged the blade into the monster's head. The brunette bared his teeth and declared that his surprise attack had failed before it even started, so he had no chance. All that was left was to die in the shadows. Sparks flew to the side and the ringing of the blade was heard. System windows appeared in front of the young man, stating that for the first time among all servers, the boss of the 46th floor of the Tomb of the Brave, the lone Kaitamaru, had been defeated. The protagonist stood in front of the defeated enemy, and the system asked if he wanted to receive a reward. The young man furrowed his brows and exhaled. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and muttered that it took a little longer than he thought. The brunette turned to young Hwa, who was frozen with a shocked expression on her face. She opened her mouth and shouted that this was simply amazing. The pink-haired girl clenched her fists and exclaimed that for the first time in history, the 46th floor had been passed. The girl burst into tears and said with a smile that the guy even passed the previous, 45th floor, which is called the Hell Floor, and the test that even the top players of France, the USA, and Korea could not pass was passed by stagnant water, and she could not believe that history was being made before her eyes. The guy turned around with a grin and noted that this was only the 46th floor out of 108, but the girl objected that this was a new record. The hero looked down, noticing the item. He frowned and his eyes widened. A blade of Kaitamaru essence, rank B+, material, fusion, was floating in the air. The young man smiled, and the girl noted that this item did not look like a good drop, but the interlocutor replied that it was not so bad. He showed a boot and said that the essence item could replace any fusion material. Young Hwa looked in surprise as the guy poured liquid onto the boot. The shoes began to vibrate and emit energy, and the system notified that the fusion of items had begun. The guy looked at the shining thing in his hands with a smile, while the notification said that the fusion was ongoing and the process could not be interrupted. The blue light smiled, and the girl exclaimed that she did not know such a possibility existed, and this was the first time she saw the fusion of items. Eogen grinned and clarified that with this, the stream ratings are guaranteed to be high. Young Hwa happily raised her hands and shouted that the world's first clearing of the 46th floor and fusion of items went to them. Their viewers will applaud standing. The brunette smiled and thought that it was time for him to show himself, because he should be enough. That is the key to the last of the 3 artifacts, and it was worth going this far. Notification: you have ascended to the 47th floor of the Tomb of the Brave. A dark figure sat ahead, and the hero thought of the slutty succubus. A blue light shone on one of the floors of the tower. Eogen walked along a dark corridor decorated with statues. The guy shuddered and looked ahead. He jerked back, dodging the attack in time. The young man looked at the mark on the floor, and young Hwa exclaimed that she could not believe that he dodged. The brunette looked up and mentally noted that he must have been waiting for her to come. He sweated and smiled. A black wing appeared. A girl with a scythe, a slutty succubus, was hovering in front of him. The brunette stuck out her tongue and narrowed her eyes. The blue light glanced at her, and her partner noted that this boss was just a beauty, but looked weaker than the previous ones. The hero frowned and replied that he would go. The enemy swung her scythe and smiled. The guy dodged the attacks cutting through the air and thought that she had a special feature, duality. The brunette sweated and widened his eyes, remembering that such monsters are divided into 2 types, those who attack with physical force, and those who use magic, and once you choose one, it cannot be changed back, and the guy chose a demon with a physical attack. The player clenched his teeth and dodged, cursing, because he thought that if it were magic, then most attacks could be neutralized by Jormungandr. The guy sweated, noticing that the blow landed right next to him. Explosions were heard throughout the corridor, and the young man noted that this was not bad. The columns and ceiling were covered in cuts. Eogen frowned and noted that the speed was high, and it was difficult to avoid due to shock waves, but the longer you delay, the worse. The brunette grinned, and the guy thought that there was one dangerous way, but either all or nothing. He turned around and clenched his fists, realizing that even if everything went smoothly, he didn't know if he would win. The succubus furrowed her brows and looked at her opponent questioningly. The guy used the skin of a sandworm, and a bright light began to emanate from him. The brunette frowned and clenched his teeth from the tension. A black paw, depravity, appeared from the hero's body. The succubus quickly appeared next to the young man, and he flinched. She struck with a quick movement. The hero jumped back and exhaled. Eogen crouched to the ground, and young Hwa said that she didn't know what he did, but it seemed that the attack did not work. The opponent was fast and also attacked physically. The brunette took out a bottle of potion and replied that everything was fine, because physical attacks take a long time to recover, and his companion exclaimed that the question was whether he would be able to attack her at this time, because she was the fastest monster she had ever met. The succubus was approaching again, swinging her scythe. The guy frowned and thought that he should deal with her speed first. He squeezed the bag in his hand and noted that it was a bit early, of course, but he was using his secret weapon. The hero clenched his teeth and poured the contents into the air. The succubus frowned, looking at him. The contents flew to the enemy. The brunette looked in surprise at the pink liquid on her body, and it was slime essence of level D, which allowed her to block the enemy's main forces. The blue light widened his eyes, and the producer asked if the guy really wanted a warning from the Korean Communications Commission. She flew up to the hero and exclaimed how he could do something like that, to which the guy replied with displeasure that the enemy was too fast. The succubus frowned darkly, while the interlocutors discussed the fact that young HWA was a pervert, since she saw something more in this than a sticky substance. The opponent frowned and widened her eyes. The hero turned around, noticing the approaching attack. He gritted his teeth and dodged. An explosion sounded near them at the sight of the blow. The guy jumped back, and young HWA noted that her attack power only increased, and the hero assumed that it was due to one of her features, increased sexual desire, which increases strength when getting into an abnormal situation, and the interlocutor noted that the enemy was simply angry because some suspicious liquid was poured on him. Ieojin dodged another blow and noted that the speed decreased, hoping that this thing would buy him time. The guy widened his eyes, watching as the succubus launched another attack. A system window appeared, fusion of items completed. The hero smiled and noted that it was just in time. He turned around and frowned. The opponent looked at him questioningly. The brunette stepped forward in new boots made of Kaitamaru leather, rank A, fire attack plus 1000, speed plus 70, lava run ability. Ieojin grinned and ran forward. The girl frowned and swung her scythe, and the hero thought that the advantage of fusion items was that you could create an item one tier higher. He kicked the enemy and noted that the special feature of Kaitamaru leather boots was lava run. Light appeared from his boots, because wherever he put his foot, everything would be on fire. A bright flash appeared ahead. The protagonist swung and delivered a flame kick, throwing the succubus back, and noted that this was energy that would turn everything within a 10-meter radius into lava from just one step. The ground began to melt, but the guy was focused only on the succubus's body. There was a footprint of a figure imprinted among the rubble, and the hero remembered that this was used during the golden years of King Madon, with earthquakes and floods. The boy looked at the shoes in shock and muttered that it was quite impressive, so he should be careful not to adopt King Madon's style. The young HWA jumped up with her fists clenched and exclaimed that they caught it, and the audience would be shocked too. The hero smiled awkwardly as the girl shouted that for the first time, the 47th floor was cleared and a B+ rank monster that could not be caught one-on-one was defeated. A B+ rank sword was floating in the air. The brunette smirked when the producer noted that the weapon would attract a lot of attention if it was put up for auction, and now she was facing the very first player climbing to the 48th floor of the Tomb of the Brave. The young man scratched the back of his head and smiled when the interlocutor asked how he felt and how high he planned to climb. Ieojin put his hand on his belt and said that he was going. The corridor of the dungeon, a female voice thanked the viewers for already collecting 100 stars. Da-hyu winked and said that she was ending the broadcast, welcoming new subscribers and happy for those who have been with her for a long time. The girl made a heart gesture and reminded that the next broadcast would be a fight with a B-rank monster, so she was waiting for everyone. Da-hyu waved her hand and said goodbye. The girl slammed her fist on the table and exclaimed why she had to host these broadcasts. She gritted her teeth and muttered that it was fine, but after that idiot, it was a death sentence, losses, and if she had the stolen money, she wouldn't have to do those damn broadcasts. Da-hyu bit her nail and thought that without the sponsorship from the broadcast, it would be hard to run the guild, so she needed to find that guy and get revenge. A man approached her and said that he had already filed a complaint, to which she replied that all is fair in war. She frowned and looked away. There were two men standing behind her, one of whom said that one of them had written 40 posts on his blog. There were cans of beer and squid on the table. From beginnings to the crown was starting on the TV. Da-hyu slumped in her chair and muttered that this was the only thing that brought her joy these days, so it was time to forget about her duties and rest. The K1 team coach and MC, Yeung, smiled and said that they had an unusual guest today. The redhead took a sip and asked who it was. The girl spat out the drink when she heard that it was the most popular streamer, after which the man asked for some comments from producer Young HWA. Her house shook from the indignant scream. Cafe Hall, Gangnam District. The protagonist sat at the table in a mask and cap, asking how the reaction was. The interlocutor turned pale and replied that she received a warning from the organization, saying that this was too much, because she sent the protagonist of the ball, but they turned a blind eye to it thanks to him, and the guy thought that it felt like everything was getting worse. The girl smiled and leaned forward. Young HWA grinned and said that the ratings were fantastic. Even if the broadcast was a little unusual, people still watched until the end. The pink-haired girl smiled awkwardly and added that the ending was shocking. The interlocutor looked away and remembered what she was talking about. A week ago. The blue flame glanced at the young man with displeasure and asked why they needed to go back, since they were already on the 108th floor. The brunette looked at her and said that the girl already had enough material for one episode, so he needed to get a reward. The guy smiled and thought that it would be a bit of a pity to lose this valuable material, since every time the record was updated, you just go and set a new one after 1-2 floors, so it's good that you can create content alone. They stood in front of the sword hovering in the air, and young HWA asked why he came to the ascended room. The blade was glowing, and the girl remembered that it was the sword he received after the B-rank battle. The flame smiled, and the producer guessed that the guy wanted to strengthen it, and then the price for it would be simply cosmic. The hero grinned and muttered that this was, of course, true. He threw the crystal into the compartment. They watched the light coming from the weapon, after which a notification appeared stating that the enhancement was successful and a +1 sword was created. There was another flash in the air, and a new notification: the enhancement was successful, a +2 sword was created, and then a +3 sword. The blade sparkled, radiating energy, and young HWA enthusiastically noted that this was already the 3rd level. The blue light turned to the young man and asked if the stats had become even cooler. She froze when she heard that the enhancement was successful, and a +4 sword was created, and then a +5 sword. When the system notified about the 6th level, the producer silently widened her eyes. Young HWA flew to the hero after the sword reached the 7th level and asked if that was not enough. The brunette silently threw another crystal into the compartment. The weapon glowed brightly, a new notification: the enhancement was successful, a +8 sword was created. The pink-haired girl questioningly looked at the monitor, not understanding what was happening. The blade was emitting red energy, and its level had increased to 9th. The girl was sweating, trying to understand how this was even possible, because the situation was changing so quickly that she did not know how to react. The protagonist looked at another crystal, and the interlocutor exclaimed that maybe it was time to put the stone back in place because it was too dangerous. The brunette stared intently ahead. Memories from the past flashed through his head, full of disappointment and tears. He grinned. Young HWA looked at the guy who was squeezing the stone in his hand and asked if he had calmed down and was glad that he had strengthened 9 times in a row. The girl raised her hands and congratulated him with a smile on his B-rank weapon with a level 9 strengthening. The hero silently threw the crystal into the compartment, and a glow appeared. The producer's eyes widened and loudly protested. The blade became invisible behind a bright flash. A notification appeared: error, strengthening failed. The weapon fragment fell at the player's feet, and the system notified about the destruction of the sword +9. Steam was coming from the blade. Iogen silently turned around and looked at the blue light. The guy made a face and shrugged. Young HWA collapsed on the floor, exhausted, and her colleagues ran up to her, asking if everything was okay, ready to call an ambulance. The pink-haired girl sighed tiredly and muttered that there were a lot of comments, and it was a shame for the sword, although it was not hers. The hero crossed his arms and replied that nothing could be done, and someday it would be more interesting. The young man grinned and thought that he did not regret it, because this was an item that was destined to be destroyed. He imagined the weapon and remembered that it would be clear when, compared with the real level of the sword, this blade had weak characteristics, and under the bullshit there was truth, a hidden item. The girl smiled and asked the hero to help her with the next broadcast, and the brunette agreed, on condition of good payment, to which she immediately agreed to give more than he wanted. Iogen looked questioningly at the phone, hearing the call. He glanced at the screen and saw a letter about joining. The hero put the gadget in his pocket and noted that it was the same sender again. The brunette froze and widened his eyes. The guy abruptly took out his smartphone and stared at it again under the puzzled look of the interlocutor. The young man looked at the screen, not believing that this was so. The protagonist sweated and realized that this was a Madamada account. The director was talking on the phone and asking, "He is not a professional player registered to someone else, right? They cannot allow others to take him away?" Then ordered to immediately send him an invitation letter, to which he received a response from the interlocutor that it is impossible to contact him. There is no email, no phone number, they can only leave a comment under his video. The blonde guy, sitting at the table, continued to say, "No, if he gets picked up by some foreign team, it will be a loss for the whole country," to which the guy asked, so he should continue posting comments. The director said, "Okay, let him continue in the same spirit, write a whole wall of text, but do not try to cheat and just copy-paste the text. All the messages need to be formulated differently, not repeat themselves." The man looked aggressively at the monitor and thought that Madong Wang. This guy meets all the requirements of a professional player. The macho and berserker styles are different in that they crush the enemy with the onslaught of pure force. Then he continued the thought that for someone seasoned in the Shadow League, he has crazy skills and control, not to mention his unique sense of combat. Fans will have no choice but to bite. This is the perfect formula for box office success. The brunette stood behind the main guy and asked that this Madong Wang, judging by the rumors, is very good. Yes. Gray-eyed turned around and asked back if he hadn't watched the video he sent him. Lim Joseph smiled and replied that he didn't watch the videos from the illegal Toto League. He then spread his arms when the director looked at him in surprise and continued to say that he heard that he had defeated the Western Chu Lord. But anyway, this loser's skills had only gotten worse after participating in illegal leagues for so long, even he could have won hundreds of times. He then looked at the man who was staring at the computer and asked if anyone who had a taste of the underground's prize money would also want to come out and play by their rules. Even the salary they offer to professional teams is just a pittance compared to what he can get competing illegally. To which he replied that all the illegal leagues are now being shut down, the country is putting pressure on them as they speak, so all the players have no choice but to say goodbye to these shady deals. Ying turned his head and continued to say that this is the best time to get Madong Wang. The brunette silently closed his eyes and then said, "Director." Suddenly, he opened his mouth in anger and screamed, "Why did he never pay so much attention to him?" To which he replied, "Go to hell, what complaints could he even have?" The guy replied that he had a lot of complaints about his salary. The blonde responded by looking at the monitor when a notification came. Then he asked in surprise, "What is this? Spam again?" To which the guy frowned and said that this needs to stop, really. Suddenly, he fell silent and looked questioningly at the computer. The gray-eyed man approached the director and called out to him. He was unconscious when the guy shouted that he fainted. Trying to bring the man to his senses, he asked what happened and told the director to come to his senses. On the screen hung a message from Madong Wang. In it he was asking about his salary. The protagonist narrated that after participating in the illegal league, he created a backup account named Madong Wang to upload video material from his PC. He did not think that anyone would want to hire a Toto League participant. He continued to say that it was hard to believe that his fake avatar Madong Wang received an invitation to the national player team before the dead water. This is the best deal of all time. There were sounds coming from the bathroom. Someone turned off the water. The protagonist noted while wiping his mouth that although he received a lot of these letters after the raid on the Nameless Queen, he then held his head and said that at that time, he refused them because the rules were too strict and the salary was close to zero, but now is a good time to force the government to sponsor esports more actively. The brunette frowned, smiled sarcastically and said that debuting as a C was a turn of events he never expected, then asked how he should start. The sun was shining brightly on the Seoul National branch of K1. The director raised his hand and shouted loudly to welcome their guests. The man in black stood behind him, saying that he was glad to see them all. He had a mask on his face when he introduced himself as Madong Wang. The three guys looked at him and thought in turn that with this mask, he was using a voice meter. Why the hell did he choose such a style? The brunette looked at him seriously and said that they were glad to meet him, and then asked, "But why in this mask?" The protagonist answered indifferently, "Because of the burned scars." Then Joseph came closer to the guy and asked, and why the hell he was late for more than 2 hours, wasn't the meeting at 5:30? When the director intervened in their conversation, put out his hand and said that it was just because of the rain and traffic, this gentleman is not to blame. The brunette got angry and yelled at the blonde why he was using formal language if he was going to be part of their team, to which he replied that he hadn't signed the contract yet. Ben asked what that idiot was whining about, to which he replied that it was because thanks to that idiot, he missed training. Looking at the men's quarrel, the protagonist thought, how nostalgic. He remembers that these two would bicker even in public. Under his mask, he hid a smile as he continued the thought that there was such chemistry between them. It was nice to see it up close. He was getting sentimental. Then he clenched his fist and thought that now he needed to maintain his arrogant image. He didn't want to fail, he needed to put pressure on them. The director and the brunette looked back in surprise when the guy asked who told him that he was needed here. The observers were shocked. Then the gray-eyed man grinned and asked what he said. The protagonist repeated his question and added that if he wanted to see him right away, he should have come to him himself, then asked why he was angry if he was the idiot who decided to wait. A voice could be heard that he sounded very confident, too much pride for someone who didn't even have an official rank. Yunho and Song Byung-gun stood and looked forward when the latter asked if he would mind if they helped him tone down his ardor a little. The red-haired man smiled and asked if he really thought the skills he learned in the illegal league tournament would help in the real professional leagues. Suddenly the director turned around and asked what was wrong with them, then turned to the new guy and said that he was really sorry. They were usually friendly. Maybe it was because they missed training today. Then one of the guys asked, he had to take the entrance test anyway, right? He would see for himself if his skills were good enough to make a fuss about him. The gray-eyed guy frowned and thought, this is just a guy who broke into an illegal league with no previous records. Who knows? Maybe the match was rigged in his favor. They invited someone who is an expert in PK at best to their national team. He needs to be put in his place. The brunette then looked away and asked who wants to start, to which he heard the first one answer that he will go first. Doesn't he know that PvP is his specialty? The second one said no, he will go, and the third one said that he is in the lowest place in the official rankings, so he should start with him. The guy looked at them and said, no, before them, the second row should get their chance. Then he looked at the blue-eyed man and asked why not give the understudy a chance. The understudy looked at the protagonist seriously. Then, without looking away, he said, no, he already had one. The gray-eyed man narrowed his eyes and said that this was low, and then asked why he retreated after saying that they couldn't go first. He thought he would have more courage after returning from the army, but apparently he was wrong. The brunette closed his eyes and said, that's enough, it's fair to start with those who are lower in level so the understudy can continue. Suddenly, the gray-eyed man looked up when he heard, no need. The man in black kept his hands in his pockets and said that he didn't have time to sweep the floor with everyone individually. When everyone looked at him, he continued saying that this was only annoying, after which he suggested ending this match, all 4 against 1. A voice was heard in the desert, telling Madong Wang that the entrance test was a one-on-one match. They couldn't break this rule even for him. The muscular guy opened his mouth and told the director that it was about their rankings. He should let them figure it out for themselves this time. Many guys looked forward when someone asked a question. Well then, should they go and see how good he was? The man held a mask in his hands. Then he put it on and he had the ability to use the serial killer feature. The notification said that the user's karma value is applied instead of the death count. After putting on the mask, the attack power will increase proportionally to the total number of kills. The attack power increases by 1 for each kill. The kill counter will only be applied to the player's active avatar. With the mask, the hero turned into a strong player. Song Byung-gun looked forward with a smirk and asked the guys, fighting 4-on-1, isn't it too much? Yunho smiled and replied that the director's position should also be considered. If he was punished too much, it would be awkward to face him later. The protagonist turned his attention to Yun-seok and said that he could be a healer, but he has more than enough agility and attack power to defend himself, plus he is probably armed with a powerful sword that is currently hidden. He then talked about Joseph, who can both attack and defend with 2 shields at the same time, thanks to his absurdly high HP, the title of Poker Face, and the famous bullish charge. He received the additional nickname of Overlord. The protagonist in the player's body looked forward and said that this lineup is definitely dazzling. What can a noob who does not even have a rank do against number 1, 5, 7, and 9 at once, not to mention he is alone? The guy then smiled and asked if this is what they think. Right. People were watching the game from the observation room. The director gritted his teeth and said that these guys, how much he wanted to team up against him. The brunette looked at Tegang and asked him why he refused to fight. With his skills, he should definitely try. It was a good opportunity. The guy opened his mouth and answered because he didn't want to which the brunette said that this was enough reason. The protagonist was a very large-scale player. A voice was heard that he would go first when the guy called Yun-seok. The blue-eyed man smiled and said that his teammate's status was higher. He was the youngest, so he would take care of it. Byung-gun got angry and said, this guy, is he serious? To which Yun-ho replied, let him. The pink-haired man rushed forward, holding a weapon in his hands. He then used his power and said that he was deeply mistaken if he thought he was an ordinary healer, after which he smiled sarcastically and continued to say that he also likes to fight, but it quickly becomes annoying. Suddenly, he put his hand forward and shouted that it was time to end it and launched a shockwave. The protagonist's fist clenched and glowed. An explosion occurred. The blue-eyed man looked forward questioningly. Then he jumped. Then he smiled and asked if creating earthquakes was his main fighting style. Looking forward, he continued to say that it was stupid. Anyone could dodge it by simply hanging in the air. The protagonist found himself on par with the enemy and extended his hand. The ground began to split. The shaking intensified. Suddenly, the hero made a blow that sent the opponent flying down. He screamed loudly as he fell. Their powers clashed. The guys watched the explosions. Then one of them frowned and asked what, and the other added what happened. The director and the understudy looked at the screen. A head was visible from under the rubble. The first person was added to the protagonist's kill list. The basic attack was increased by 1. Then the giant took a step forward. The red-eyed man smiled wickedly and asked, so, it's already been reduced to 3-1, huh? The blue-eyed man opened his mouth and said that he channeled the power of fire into the ground right under his feet, thus lifting himself into the air. The protagonist extended his hand. Then he made a magic strike. The second opponent dodged and defended. Suddenly, the hero stopped and thought, a rapier, this is Byung-gun. The opponent frowned and thought, how can he dodge every strike? He won't be able to see it thanks to the camouflage effect. There was a flash. Sparks flew around. The opponents confronted each other. The brunette gritted his teeth and shouted, "Madness." Their battle continued. Suddenly, the protagonist smashed the ground. Then he carefully extended his hand. He stopped and thought that he seemed to be paralyzed. This shield is at least rank B. There must be a special skill that includes paralysis as an abnormal effect. The guy looked forward angrily. Suddenly, he transformed and used lightning strike. Gray Eyes smirked and said that he was good. He admitted it. It was embarrassing to admit, but they would have to attack him at the same time. Red Eyes smiled and said that their healer was not here, then asked if they really planned to attack in a crowd. Looking at the opponent's concentrated power, he thought that the paralysis was due to the shield, a combination of high-class magic attacks from the 4 best ranks of each class. Then he continued his thought, looking at the brunette, that the invisible assassin was at the forefront of a surprise attack. The hero stood still, then asked if he screwed up. Suddenly, he dashed and flew up. There was another explosion. Gray Eyes frowned, gritted his teeth and asked if he was using the same trick as before. Did he really think it would work a second time if he activated the earthquake nullification skill? A drop of sweat ran down his face. Then he looked down and asked what, and shouted that the ground was melting. With the help of the skin feature from Kanchimaru's legs, the protagonist walked on the hot ground. The brunette opened his mouth wide and shouted that everything was turning into lava. The protagonist, smiling, said that his skill melted all the ground around him within a radius of 10 meters, and then asked how long the guys could dance on the lava ground. Suddenly, he began to climb with his hands. Rocks were flying around the guy. Then he concentrated his power and said, "Damn, he didn't cast the defense spell completely." Suddenly, the opponent fired magic towards him. A fist appeared in front of the brunette's face. There was a commotion. A metal claw grabbed his face and he started screaming. The protagonist defeated him. The two guys looked at what was happening, when one of them shouted that he easily dealt with Yahello, and the second said to stay close to him. The two of them are not as strong in defense as he is, so they need to double their attack. They just need to get out of here. The hero took a step forward. The 50-50 skill reduces the damage of the environment by 50%. Suddenly, the protagonist smiled and asked, "So this is how they are trying to hide?" Then he, in the body of the Iron Hero, said that it was not his shift, and launched the alien skill Whirlwind. A hurricane spread across the entire area. The brunette gritted his teeth and ordered Byung-gun to quickly cancel the stealth mode. He opened his mouth and shouted that it was too late. The hero stood there and said that now he felt that victory would be too easy. Just think, this is all they can do, they will die like flies. Suddenly, a transformed man headed towards him. He realized that it was Joseph. Their forces collided. Sparks flew. The brunette held swords in his hands. Looking at him seriously, the protagonist said that in the end, he deigned to show both his shields. The number 1 in Korea is going fully armed against him. Incredible. The red-eyed man smiled sarcastically and asked, "Isn't it exciting?" After these words, the opponent began to attack. Suddenly, he ran towards the opponent. Then he swung his sword. The giant dodged his blow, and then he left. The brunette continued to strike. The hero stopped and looked forward. The opponent pulled his hand back. Then he used a force that made the earth collapse. The opponents continued to fight when one of them said that the rankings, the total league, none of that mattered. Then he smiled widely and said that in a match where 4 go against 1 and end up on the losing side, it is a complete collapse. From now on it is a matter of his stubbornness. The guy ran at the opponent shouting that he will not fall without defeating him. The protagonist with the hero's body smiled and replied that it was good, the true determination of number 1. He was not going to give in either. The brunette looked at the opponent seriously as he stood in front of him. Then the protagonist rushed forward. The gray-eyed man gritted his teeth and asked, "A frontal attack using earthquake? He can't break these shields." The battle was going on when the hero asked who said he was trying to break them. The brunette looked forward seriously. Then the iron claw touched the shield. The opponent looked at her in surprise and said that in his left hand it was. There was something glowing in the claw. The guy raised his hand up. After which the protagonist extended his hand and asked, "Well, is this a bull rush?" His special move. Then he swung his fist and shouted, "Checkmate." There was a flash between the players. Ijin frowned and said that no matter how high his defense was or how much health he had, it did not matter now. Suddenly, he clenched his teeth. Then he launched his power and shouted that he would grind him into dust before the earth recovered. The director was shocked. The brunette looked forward, raising his head. Sweat was pouring down the blue-eyed man's face. Someone noted that the top players of Korea, a dream team of 4 leading players who even participated in professional leagues, a team of such a level was defeated by 1 person. The protagonist looked at the destroyed earth and said that there was not a trace left of them. Ma Dong-wan, no, dead water. The narration began that, compared to how he was when they clashed in the illegal Toto League, he seemed to have become ruthless, destructive, and much stronger than before. He plays completely differently than his seniors, the players in the rankings, and the rest of the older generation. He really is that strong. The director, looking up, said that he thinks he will now draw up a contract of employment, to which someone replied, "Okay." The hero standing in the desert thought that these were probably temporary items, but their quality could be compared to real ones. Compared to their items, he can be estimated at about B rank. The protagonist smiled sarcastically and continued the thought that now that he thinks about it, his items were a little better, but in a 4-on-1 match, it is fair. If he only used 2 gloves and 1 shoe, he would most likely have a hard time. The brunette looked straight and thought that he wants to catch up, he wants recognition. Looking at the screen, he thought that he wanted to stand next to him. Then his fist clenched and he said, "So cool." They finally ended up in the Castle of Malice. Drake rubbed his shoulders and said that he felt uneasy about this place. It was cold here despite the fact that they were in the south. The protagonist said that he got wet when entering here and they were heading there. Iogen came to the Castle of Malice to get the last of the 3 artifacts. He asked Drake if he wanted to join, and he readily agreed. People were hanging around the hall. The boys ran and the protagonist said that in the very center of this castle there was a secret passage that led straight to the boss room. He thought they could call it a back door. He looked ahead and said that it was because there were too many annoying zombies in the way. The zombie opened its mouth. The boys approached a dark doorway and the protagonist said that as long as there was daylight they were weak, but it would take too long to deal with everyone, so it would come down to them just avoiding them. At that moment, a loud scream was heard and the boys turned towards it. The brunette grabbed the blonde by the shoulder as he moved forward, shouting that it sounded like a woman's voice. She was in danger and they had to save her. Iogen told him to calm down and wait. The protagonist stared. Strange sounds were coming from the door. They kept coming from there. The protagonist rushed there, saying to hurry up. The guy asked in confusion if he was going to help. Iogen smiled evilly and said that if it was an NPC, he would help find him later if he wanted, and if it was a player, then even better. He ran into enemies first and they should take advantage of this opportunity. Drake remained silent in response. Then he ran, saying that it seemed true, he was sorry and they would save him if he survived until they returned. They ran inside, and he asked the protagonist what they were trying to find here. The protagonist looked somewhere to the side and said that he found it. A dark silhouette was standing in the corner. It was the gossip Camilla. She rushed at them with her arms outstretched. Drake shot her with an arrow and said that she did not seem that strong, and asked if monsters like zombies like this one did not have a self-destruct function. The doll fell to the floor and he said that it was not this one, to which Iogen replied that he had a keen eye. The doll's body glowed blue and the guy said that something was appearing. Camilla the spirit appeared and asked if talking about what rumors were saying was a great sin. The guys looked at her and a notification came that they had opened the hidden quest of the gossip master. The girl cried and said that the priest punished her for gossiping. He made her climb the spire of the cathedral and cut a pillow with a knife, letting the feathers fly away, and then she had to collect them, and after failing the task, she was left to die. The girl held onto the fabric saying that this was her last regret. The guys received a quest to help Camilla collect all the feathers. They have to collect 19,910,321 feathers. Drake looked at the floor and said that now that he thinks about it, the floor is strewn with white feathers. The 2 boys looked at the floor and the blonde asked how long they had been there. He picked up 1 feather, looked at it and said that there were too many of them and asked if they needed an item like a vacuum cleaner. The protagonist picked up a few feathers, saying that this was not the way to do this quest. He clenched his fist and a notification came that they had already collected 12 feathers. He then stomped, activating the flame step. The feathers rose into the air and turned black. They began to slowly dissolve into space. Then they all turned into ash. The space around them was very mossy and a notification came that they had collected 12 out of 12 feathers. Iogen smiled widely and Drake asked if he had gone too far. If he decided to do it normally, this quest would be cheating, because it was impossible to collect almost 20 million feathers. A notification came that the quest was completed. The girl hugged the pillow and thanked him and said that thanks to them she was able to collect all the feathers. She was so glad that the cut was on the white pillow. Then she rose into the air and said that if it was a black pillow, it would be bad. The guys looked up, and the blonde asked what she was talking about. The girl disappeared from their sight. The protagonist silently watched her. A black feather fell from the sky. Then the black bag of the gossip Camilla fell from his feet. The guy grinned and said that this was the key to the boss's room. He ripped the bag open and shook out the feathers from there. They scattered all over the space. The feathers flew up. Then they began to dissolve in the air. Drake raised his head up and said, "Wow, this is an item that can change day to night in a certain radius." Night fell, the dead raised their heads. The protagonist threw his head back and shouted that he knew that the Castle of Malice must be passed at night. The gates should open, the dead are looking at the surroundings. The protagonist smiled and said that the secret door to the boss room only opens at night, so he came to Camilla's secret quest to activate it. Drake turned to the protagonist and asked why they couldn't just come at night, to which the brunette replied that the zombies they met on the way here are much more active at night. He just wanted to make things as convenient as possible. A hole appeared in the wall. Drake clenched his fist and said that he didn't remember her being here before. Isn't she hard to notice unless you're deliberately looking for her? The ladies turned around when they heard someone calling out. The girl tried to answer, then she straightened up. The protagonist looked at her with displeasure and thought, what the hell? So it was Dahyu's scream. The girl gave up her fist and said that she was glad to run into him and ordered him to wait for her in place and not move. The guy looked at her and didn't understand what she was talking about. The boys started crawling through the tunnel and the main character suggested leaving before they got caught up in something. Dahyu ran after them shouting that they told them to wait for her. Then a lot of zombies appeared. The girl opened her mouth in fear and shouted to wait a second. She also ran into the tunnel. The zombies pressed their faces against the iron bars. The hole in the wall disappeared. Half an hour before arriving at the Castle of Evil, the girl looked at the camera saying that everyone thought she would go to the boss. It must be because last time she said it would be nice to speed up, but even a scary military march starts with a normal step. Then she stuck out her tongue and asked how they were going to get to the boss. Then she smiled at the camera and said that as she promised in her last stream, today she will record a guide on surviving against B-rank monsters. She will call it Survive the Castle of Evil. The girl smiled at the camera and said that their mission today is a full review of this dungeon filled with zombies. Most of them are from C+ to B rank, so you need to be careful otherwise they can fatally injure. Dahyu showed a heart at the camera, winked and asked to pray for her. Strange sounds were heard. A zombie appeared behind the girl, and she screamed that she was scared. She ran away from the zombie and screamed. The zombie looked at her in confusion. The zombie extended his hand to the girl. The girl looked at the camera with fear. Then the camera fell and the girl screamed loudly. The camera turned off. Dahyu leaned her hands on the door. She sighed heavily and said that screaming over and over again was really exhausting. She slid down the wall and asked if it was so necessary. The overall message of the survival broadcast was to save a beautiful girl with her hair swinging. She looked sadly to the side and said that she needed the money and she had no choice. Then she straightened up and opened the door. Zombies were moving towards her. The girl cut down several zombies with one blow and said that it was time to teach these bastards a lesson. She stepped forward. The doors slammed shut. The girl stood there with the weapon in her hands. Then she wiped her cheek and said, "Great." Dahyu pressed the record button on the camera. The girl bent over and tried to catch her breath, saying that she thought she was going to die. She was so scared that she didn't even realize that the recording had stopped. She wasn't even sure that she was saving herself. Then she turned towards the door and said that she ran deeper into the castle and stayed here. The girl clenched her fist and asked what now. Then she asked to drop donations if they didn't want her to die here. She looked around the room. Then she grinned and thought that of course she wasn't going to die anytime soon. The zombies at the entrance were about C+ and B ranks, but their level drops to C and C+ during the day. Their movements also slow down, so she can run as much as she wants. Dahyu grinned and thought that not many people know this secret. She won't get any extra experience or drops from them, so it's a little frustrating. The space began to fill with smoke. Night fell. The girl looked and didn't understand anything. The dead raised their heads. The girl didn't believe what she heard. The moon illuminated the space. The girl opened her mouth and asked what was going on. It was not time for night yet. Zombies crawled out of all the cracks. They began to move towards the girl. The dead began to look around. The girl screamed loudly as the zombie reached out to her. She slashed at him with her axe. The zombie was fallen. The girl looked at him in confusion. The dead man reached out his hands to her face. The girl ran away screaming. While running, she turned around and didn't understand what was happening here. She was really surrounded by C+ and B rank monsters. The girl heard a familiar voice. She gritted her teeth and said, "Just don't tell her that it was dead water." The zombie raised his hands. The girl kicked him in the face. Then she continued to run away from them. She ran deeper into the room. The guys turned towards the sound. The girl fished from behind at the bottom of the hole in the wall and thought about what it was and what they were doing opposite her. She looked at the wall and thought that they had found a corridor leading into the depths of the castle. The zombies ran after her. The girl gritted her teeth and said that now was not the time to think. She rushed after the guys. She slid into the hole. She fell, hit herself and asked what this place was and realized that she was sitting in blood. Then she looked at the protagonist and asked what he had done and that the night had come too early, to which the guy asked Miss Boss Beauty to calm down, and the girl asked again what he called her. The protagonist looked forward and asked that she would not have the nerve to be angry with him here. The girl looked at him in surprise. Sounds were heard from the depths of the tunnel, and the protagonist said that in the end, this was not the safest place and she had better take care of herself. The room began to fill with smoke. The guy threw his head back. He combed his hair back, and in the depths of the corridor, a monster with a pumpkin on its head appeared, and someone said that he had found it. The blonde reflected the attack. Iyajin looked away carefully. The snake grabbed the enemy. Gritting her teeth, Dahyu struck. Splashes of blood flew past her face. The hero stepped back in surprise when she struck again. Holding the body in his mouth, the snake heard Iyajin indignantly asking Dahyu if she wanted to get rid of him, but the girl replied that he should have died when they first met. Frowning, they looked at each other. The girl also said that it was his fault that she ended up here, and even her brother was not around. The hero was surprised, but replied that if she was not happy with something, she should have left. The moon was shining brightly in the sky. Dahyu noted that it was night now, and all thanks to him. Looking at the monsters walking, the hero asked if she was the one filming the survival stream, and suggested trying to film something like an escape for the sake of views, to which she noted that he was really hopeless. Frowning and clenching her fist, the girl thought about killing him right now, but the situation was not the best. Even if she took care of him, the whole area outside was teeming with zombies. A thought appeared in the haze. If it was only him, everything could have turned out fine, but Drake. Imagining the blonde behind Iajin, she decided that she would have to deal with 2 players from the unofficial ratings at once. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, putting her hands on her hips, she said that she could do little alone and would go with them, because in the end they could become a team, and she was useful for the tank. A message appeared stating that the guild had sent a request to create a team. Her hand touched the reject button. Indignant, Dahyu opened her mouth wide, asking why he did not accept. Iajin replied that he did not want to. While striking, Drake listened with a smile as the hero said that creating teams was not his style, to which the girl objected that he was a liar. Because he had archers, Iajin replied that they were not in a team, but just walked together, to which the blonde agreed. Then the confused girl extended her hand, asking that there was nothing wrong with being on the same team. He could take any item that dropped. He wouldn't even have to share experience, so why not create a team on paper? It would be better for both of them if they joined forces. The girl opened her eyes in surprise, hearing the words about her axe. The axe was glowing brightly. Looking at the weapon, Iajin said that if the girl offered this item, he would consider her offer. Dahyu frowned. Then she put her weapon on her shoulder, saying that he was a hopeless bastard. Drake looked at her. Then Iajin turned away, saying that if she wanted, then she could follow him, as long as she didn't get in his way. He didn't care that they didn't get along. He smiled widely, saying that she could continue like this, after which he looked at the gray walls and ceiling, drawing the others' attention to the cracks in the wall, and told them not to go too far, otherwise the stones would collapse. Looking at the other wall, he noted that they would not be able to run across in time, so they would have to just crawl. Seeing the dark corridor ahead, he said that arrows would fly at them here, so it was better to lower their heads and not step here, otherwise they would fall into a pit swarming with zombies. And then he looked at the floor, said that there would be a thread that would tie their ankles, and then the guillotine blades would fall on them right from the ceiling, so they had to be careful. Smiling, passing all the traps, he told them to go exactly 5 meters forward, and then to the left, there was a dead end ahead, so they had to be careful. Dahyu, who was walking behind him, asked him in surprise how he knew all this, and was he a master of the game? To which Iajin replied that he simply knew everything in advance, because if he were a master, he would be swimming in a pool of money and shares without having to play. Looking at the hero in the cloak, the girl could not understand how obsessed he was with the game, because many of these traps were not even discovered. Iajin silently frowned, thinking about the fact that he had never actually died on this map, and all thanks to the collective information. Seeing the red floor in front of him, he thought about the location of the traps and monsters was the experience of countless players who died over time. Studying and analyzing was his rebirth. He touched the wall with his hand, thinking that it could be said that he was now rotten water, the water that had stagnated in one place for 15 years, now this was his essence.